Chapter 6, Charred Child Flesh. A ratty grey cloak hung from the invisible girl in loose folds. Clumped tufts of unkempt black hair tumbled down her shoulders in an infestation of loose strands and split ends. The fragile hand that gripped Sloane's wrist wore a bracelet embedded with a pyrite gemstone. When Sloane looked at her, she averted her eyes and adjusted the thick-lensed spectacles barely supported by her tiny nose. "Thanks. I guess." It was the third time someone had rescued Sloane from imminent death in as many hours. But who was counting? The girl parsed her lips in what was either a smile or a grimace. "Oh, you're welcome, but they can still hear you. I can only make things look not there. I can't take them away." "Makes sense." Sloane unrooted from the corner between the cabinets and gazed up, trying not to look particularly interested in the invisible girl. The imps had clambered back into the open cabinets, resuming their activities as though no disturbance had occurred. Even the walls seemed to have stopped moving, or else they were biding their time. A hollow tranquility fell over the corridor as Sloane led her new friend back the way she came in search of an exit. She tried to conceal her footfalls, but she could only tread so lightly in military-grade boots. The invisible girl wore a sort of moccasin and glided wraith-like beside her. "I forgot your name," said Sloane. The girl hesitated, rubbed her throat. "Omaha." "That's right. Nebraska Cornhusker country." She looked Asian, uncommon for the Midwest, but metropolitan girls often got shoved to the boondocks. "Why you following me, Omaha?" Omaha tensed. I'm not following you." "Cut the shit, kid. No way you just happened to be loitering in the same corner I got chased to." "You're following me, why?" The girl stammered and fidgeted as Sloane dragged her along. She shored up her shoulders defensively and tightened her grip on Sloane's wrist. I can't tell you that," said Omaha. I don't think I'm allowed." "Allowed by who?" Her voice tapered away and she lowered her eyes so much it was a miracle her glasses stayed on. Silence predominated as it became clear Omaha had no intention to answer. Pity, because Sloane would have loved to hear the answer. She doubted this meek, jittery little creature was here of her own volition. But given all Omaha had to do was release Sloane's wrist to drop her back to the wraiths, Sloane had no way to pressure a response. They continued down the endless, unchanging corridors in uncomfortable silence. Their linked hands compounded the awkwardness. Omaha's fingers trembled and her palm was surprisingly warm. The silence built and built until with a frantic and sudden intensity Omaha began to stammer again. I'm sorry, for biting you. You know. On the bus." She bowed her head as if in anticipation of a blow. Like an abused dog. What asshole had coerced the poor girl to come here? Sloane tried to give a smile, but the smile probably sucked and Omaha probably didn't see it. "Don't worry about it, kid. No hard feelings." "I didn't mean to. I mean, I didn't think about it. I just got scared. I thought you were going to hurt me, and I... You still think I'm going to hurt you?" Omaha said nothing. "Well, don't worry. You don't hurt me, I don't hurt you. Deal?" Omaha said nothing. Another period of silence descended. Sloane wondered if this labyrinth of cabinets had any end. Eventually Omaha worked up the nerve to speak again. Miss Sloane?" "No need for the miss. If it's, not much of a bother, could you maybe, keep this quiet from your companions? Miss Delaney and Miss Erica?" Erica must be Winnipeg, although Sloane did not recall Winnipeg giving her real name. "If I told them, would someone be mad at you?" said Sloane. Omaha looked up, her submissiveness erased in an instant, her dark eyes piercing and stern. "My friend never gets mad at me. But I would get very mad at you." An unseen bird squawked from the rafters above. Sloane bit her lip, unsure how to respond. Unease crept into her, even as Omaha swiftly reverted to her normal fidgeting and trembling and even muttered a shriveled apology. The girl could easily be a lunatic. It happened from time to time, abused and tortured girls sometimes saved themselves from the law of the cycles by fleeing from reality, altering their perceptions of the world to defend themselves from its pain. Omaha's first response to an unwanted social situation had been to bite someone. Not damning, but suspicious. Generally Kyubey slated those types for termination. Whenever girls became dangerous, although Kyubey probably cared more about the fact that crazy chicks were harder to manipulate, the rat bastard posted a grief cube bounty on their heads. Some girls made livings as so-called terminators, traveling the country in search of loonies to cull. But Kyubey had said nothing about Omaha. No, he had said that Omaha's invisibility made her hard to track. Sloane had accepted the explanation at the time, but how did a girl in control of a mid-sized city disappear and Kyubey not at least have an inkling of where she went? She tried to remember Kyubey's exact wording. Had he said he had failed to track her, or just that she was difficult to track? Because the latter did not preclude the former. She did remember he said he did not invite her to be part of your team. Another choice Kyubeyism. Sloane really wondered the identity of Omaha's friend. Calm down, she told herself. She needed to escape the maze before she worried about anything else. Don't worry, said Sloane. I won't tell. Thank you, Miss Sloane. It's very important to me. They walked. And walked. In silence. Sloane tried to think of ways to wheedle more information, something subtle to trip Omaha up. But conversation ranked pretty low on Sloane's list of qualities. She couldn't even think of icebreakers to at least break the all-consuming silence that made everything so damn eerie, like she were dragging along a living doll instead of a human being. What could Sloane ask? Go the Delaney Pollock route and ask about wishes? Sloane doubted she even wanted to know what such a miserable girl had sold her soul for. And if Omaha really were deranged, who knew what would set her off? Discussion of families, friends, fucking pets were minefields waiting to erupt. So Sloane said nothing and pulled her companion by the hand. Omaha sometimes murmured like she had something to say, then thought better and averted her eyes. Minutes passed. Maybe a half hour. Time was difficult to gauge in the miasma. The labyrinth had no end. Every corridor split into two more. Going in circles was a real possibility. Sloane soldiered on like she knew what she was doing, and Omaha never corrected her or suggested an alternate route. Sloane frustration mounted and almost boiled over. Couldn't Omaha at least do something, when out of the silence emerged the voice of Delaney, a crystalline chime with slight urgency. Sloane love? You there? Thank God. Someone remembered her. Yeah, said Sloane. Blasted my way through a mountain of imps, but I'm here. Stupendous. I was so worried. I hadn't heard from you in so long, it's hard not to assume the worst. Do you know where you are? Sloane checked the cabinets around her. They looked the same as all the other cabinets. Not a clue. Still in the library. Well, it's best if we reconvene, said Delaney. I'll send some bubbles into the maze. If you find one, follow it to me, all right, love? Sounds good. Omaha said nothing about the interaction. Sloane tried to wink at her as if to say, see? I won't sell you out to them, but Omaha was pro at eye contact evasion. After a few more minutes of aimless meandering, they found a red bubble adrift amid the passages. The moment they sighted it, Omaha relinquished Sloane's wrist. The effect was instantaneous. Sloane re-emerged in the visible realm while Omaha crumbled from existence, free to stalk Sloane unnoticed. Not a reassuring thought. Sloane poked the bubble. It wobbled. I found one, she broadcasted to Delaney. Awesome. You must be close. As if tugged by a magnet, the bubble drifted down the corridor. It moved faster than Sloane expected. She jogged to keep up with it, whipping around corners and ignoring the numb pain in her leg. She strained her ears for Omaha's footsteps beside her, but heard nothing at all. It only took a few minutes to follow Delaney's bubble to the exit. Rasping for breath, Sloane shuffled against the door and forced it open, spilling into the main hall. The black ocean of lacquered tile that spanned in both directions gleamed with the sanguine aura of Delaney's bubbles, which floated around the cavernous space with rosy cheer. No trace remained of the massive facsimile of Delaney's town map, which had taunted them upon arrival. Delaney stood in the exact center of the hall, twirling her staff. Oh, how lovely you made it! Sloane doubled over and caught her breath. She hated cardio, but it embarrassed her. She couldn't run 15 minutes without being totally winded. She had always been one to move in sprints of activity instead of bouts of endurance. Where's Winnipeg? She wheezed. Delaney waved her staff and eliminated Sloane's minor cuts, as well as the pain in her leg.
I wouldn't worry about Winnipeg, she's a powerful girl. Whatever's befallen her, she has the wiles to escape.
Sloane's eyes narrowed.
But really? How were you separated? The same way you were separated from us.
She frowned.
I didn't hurt her, if that's what you're thinking. I know things got quite accusatory back at the inn, but Winnipeg gave you the completely wrong impression of me. I want nothing more than to do good deeds. I don't give a shit about that. Where did you last see her? Oh, you know.
She hesitated, raised a lazy hand to indicate a door.
Somewhere thereabouts, who knows? Does it matter?
Although her lungs still pounded, Sloane lifted herself and headed in the indicated direction. Delaney swept into her path with a single flowing step. Her long white gown swished at her ankles.
You know, Winnipeg cares very little about the people we're saving here. All she cares about is herself and her territory. She likes to be in control, she likes to feel secure.
Winnipeg? Said Sloane. She tried to pass Delaney. Can you hear me?
You'll need to do something about her eventually, love. Or you won't receive the grief cubes you need.
Winnipeg? Are you alive? Delaney placed a hand on Sloane's shoulder. Her fingers curled around the bone, kneading the malnourished flesh through the overcoat.
I want to help, love.
From the dead air, Winnipeg's brusque voice cut into Sloane's head. Fargo. If you're with Regina Saskatoon, kill her. Now. Delaney's arms coiled around Sloane's body and drew her into an embrace. She nuzzled her head against Sloane's shoulder, her warm breath brushing strands of hair off the nape of Sloane's neck. Her floral aroma suffocated Sloane's nostrils as her entire body went into lockdown. Normal human interactions were hard enough, but this was uncharted territory. Sloane's arms froze taut at her sides as Delaney pressed closer, her not insignificant breasts difficult not to notice despite Sloane's best efforts. Delaney lifted her head and peered into Sloane's eyes with a fearful expression.
Please, Sloane, you wouldn't hurt me, would you?
A frantic impulse struck Sloane and she disentangled herself, staggering back to put distance between her and Delaney. Her machine gun materialized in her hands.
Don't touch me! What did you do to Winnipeg?
The timorous, disembodied voice of Omaha whispered into Sloane's ear,
leave her alive. Miss Delaney is needed for now. If she tries anything, I'll stop her.
Sloane was already on edge, but Omaha's words pushed her toward freakout. Needed for now? Needed for what? To kill the Archon? And after they did that, when Delaney was no longer needed, then what? What the fuck was happening here? She caught herself before she could say or do something stupid. Delaney had drawn back, wrapping her arms around her and shaking a little at the sight of Sloane's gun aimed at her. Sloane took a deep breath and made the gun disappear.
Look! Delaney! I'm not going to kill you. But you need to be honest with me. What did you do to Winnipeg? I did nothing, said Delaney. Please, we need to leave before she finds us. She's dangerous and paranoid, she'll kill us both.
Omaha whispered,
Miss Erica is also needed for now.
Sloane disliked the psychopathic advice that kept seeping into her ear like a devil on her shoulder. Not that Delaney was acting like the paradigm of sanity either, but fuck. That was all Sloane could think on the matter, a blunt and empty swear with no intrinsic meaning. Nothing else made sense.
I'm gonna find Winnipeg.
She spoke as if to tell herself rather than anyone else. She brushed past Delaney and approached the door on the opposite end of the hall that Delaney had indicated earlier. It was totally possible Delaney had lied about the door. Anything was totally possible. Delaney clasped her hands and shook them in supplication.
Oh no, love, you don't want to do that. What's she ever done to help you? At every turn she abandons you. Who stuck with you always? Me, right?
Sloane continued for the door.
Well,
said Delaney.
If that's the case. I hate to do this, love. But it's for your own good.
The swish of something heavy rushed through the air behind her. Sloane dove aside, rolled to her feet, and manifested her machine gun, swinging it to face Delaney and firing. The moment she squeezed the trigger she saw her mistake. A large, red bubble had affixed itself to the end of the barrel. It lit up as streams of Sloane's light magic bounced inside, filling the bubble until it burst and the accumulated magic erupted in every direction. A beam sliced a chunk from Sloane's leg and another pierced her lung. The breath whooshed out of her as she struck the ground. Her gun landed in front of her, hewn by another ricocheting beam. Delaney popped the barrier she had placed around herself and emerged unscathed.
I hope that didn't hurt too bad.
She crouched and stroked Sloane's hair. Sloane tried to roll over and failed. She sputtered to breathe.
Now, I'm going to knock you unconscious for a bit. When you wake up, you'll be nice and healed and we can have a good long talk about saving the universe together.
Delaney gripped her staff in both hands and hefted it above her head. The massive ruby at its end flashed with light residue as it bore down on Sloane's skull. Something invisible lashed out and severed both of Delaney's hands at the wrist. The staff, hands still attached, flopped to the ground and 2 arcs of blood shot from the nubs. Delaney held her arms in front of her and regarded the spurting stumps with mild fascination.
Oh dear.
Her blood flowed onto Sloane's prone torso.
Did you do this, love?
Sloane wheezed in reply. Bubbles formed around Delaney's lifeless hands. With a series of nods and pantomimes she directed the bubbles to carry her hands back to her bleeding stumps. She worked with composure and efficiency, wasting no time affixing her pieces back together. When the hands had reattached to their proper positions, the bubbles popped and doused her forearms in blood. When the blood evaporated, not a trace of the mishap remained. Delaney balled her hands into fists and wiggled her fingers to test her healing. Satisfied, she picked up her staff and regarded it.
Or perhaps you didn't do it at all. I recall you mentioned something when we first met. About a 4th girl. One who could go invisible at will.
Unbeknownst to Delaney, the blood that had spilled from her hands began to seep into Sloane's own wounds. Slowly, Sloane's breath returned and her pain diminished. She continued to wheeze and sputter, maintaining the charade of injury.
Who knows?
Said Delaney with a shrug.
A girl who can turn invisible whenever she wants. Isn't that a tad overpowered, Sloane dear? I mean, my soul gem is right here.
She motioned to the brooch of her gown, a crimson gemstone set in a golden clasp.
Were this invisible girl here right now, she would need only 1 strike to eliminate me completely.
A challenge. Omaha wherever she was did not bite. Probably she sensed the obvious trap. As of yet, Delaney had demonstrated no offensive capabilities beyond the pathetic use her staff as a bludgeon. But her healing and barrier magic were nothing to scoff at, and she knew how to use them well. She was not an adversary to take lightly. However, she could not defend against what she did not expect. Sloane reared up, already swinging her arm before she materialized a new machine gun in her hand. Delaney's face formed an expression of indignation before the hunk of metal crashed against her skull. A breathless squeak escaped her lips and she dropped to the floor. Sloane let go of her gun, blood splattered at the place of connection. Delaney's magic cut out and her magical girl costume disappeared, replaced by civilian jeans and hoodie.
Thank you,
Omaha's voice stammered. It remained creepily close to Sloane's ear.
I was worried I would have to compromise myself to keep you safe.
Thanks, Sloane forced herself to say. Delaney's soul gem returned to its egg form and rolled against her outstretched arm. Sloane briefly considered smashing it. But murdering an unconscious foe, not something she could do. Besides, Delaney was crazy but Omaha was right, she was useful. They still had an Archon to kill. No time to waste deliberating. Winnipeg was still somewhere, maybe in danger. Sloane had to act fast and decisive. After pocketing Delaney's soul gem, she lifted the senseless body and hoisted it onto her shoulder. The girl was already light and an ounce of magic made her weigh as much as a feather, legs and arms dangling. Winnipeg, she said. I incapacitated Delaney. Where are you? Running. No exit. I'm coming to help. Which door? The one on the right. No snide jabs about Sloane's worthlessness, at least. Sloane turned toward the door on the right, the same door Delaney had indicated.
Omaha. Take Delaney to the inn. I have her soul gem, so she won't wake until I return. I'm going for Winnipeg.
Omaha manifested from the murk. In the visible realm, her decrepit cloak seemed even more filthy. She tugged at her collar and shuffled her feet.
I'm not supposed to leave you. Too bad. I'm not fighting with Delaney draped over my shoulder. If you want me to keep her alive, do as I say.
She unslung the body and pushed it toward Omaha. Omaha shirked back, teeth clenched, hands upraised. Sloane continued to proffer the temporary cadaver with an expectant glare until Omaha adjusted her glasses and took it, placing her tiny hands around the body with great care.
Okay, but, I'll be back. If there's trouble, please call me. I'll come.
In an instant, both Omaha and Delaney's body vanished. Sloane sighed, relieved to be rid of them both, before she seized her gun and charged through the door in search of Winnipeg. She burst into a cavernous arena split down the middle by an infinite chasm. A few filing cabinets were strewn near the edge, many tilting precariously, documents spilling from upheaved drawers into the abyss below. The walls of the atrium were speckled with mouths of tunnels which plunged into darkness. Each tunnel had a smooth cylindrical surface, although stalagmites jutted between the cabinets in the main area. Another motherfucking maze. Sloane scanned the tunnels for any marginally more promising than the rest, but they were all identical and indistinct. Where are you, Winnipeg? I can't see anything. Sloane could help that. She discarded her gun and extended her hands in front of her as she charged her magical energy and focused it into her fingertips. A ball of light grew in her palms and illuminated the atrium, causing scattered gremlins to scurry for safety. She squinted and turned away as the glow gathered intensity, spilling into the innumerable caverns and flooding through their veiny passages. Anything now? Said Sloane. Nothing. Wait a light. Sloane figured she didn't need to tell her to run toward it. She focused her attention on maintaining the pulsing spheroid. From one of the tunnels, Winnipeg emerged at a full tilt sprint, half her face marred by a jagged bloody gash that rendered one eye nothing more than a sealed welt. She leapt through the air in a squall of wind, hitting the top of one of the leaning cabinets and dashing along the line between solid ground and a plunge into the chasm with imperturbable finesse.
Run,
she said. From the same tunnel burst a gargantuan worm, sized exactly the width of the cavernous opening, its head an enlarged version of the same grey head that adorned all wraiths, its mouth ringed with rows of gnashing fangs that tore into dirt and dust and paper and anything in its path. Imps and filing cabinets were sucked into the black vortex of its mouth, into which only oblivion awaited. Sloane hurled her light orb at the worm, aiming it just over Winnipeg's head and into the gaping maw. The light struck the staticky crackle of its eyes without even phasing it. She scooped up her gun and ran for the door back to the hall. As soon as she turned, the door began to close as if propelled by an unseen force. She threw a hapless arm to prop it, but it slammed closed before she could reach it. She planted her feet and blasted it with her gun, the woodwork smashed with the first round, but through the opening was no longer the main hall but a single tunnel sloped slowly downward into an imperceivable blackness. Unthinking, Sloane prepared to sprint down the tunnel, but Winnipeg seized her by the collar and yanked her aside. Idiot! We fight in the open. The surprisingly formidable grip of the younger girl slingshot Sloane out of the way as the worm crashed upon the spot they had stood moments prior. Sloane staggered back in a wake of dust and debris, stumbling over her feet and slamming against a row of cabinets. In contrast, Winnipeg leaped at the same cabinet, hit it with both feet, and went soaring at the thrashing serpentine body of the worm wraith. She tumbled over it, her katana flashing out like a streak of silver, and as she descended on the other side a long gash spread between the worm's meaty segmentations. The worm howled in agony as unctuous black fluid seeped from its wound and seared the ground. Winnipeg jumped again, evading the flailing tail that tried to swat her out of the air and cleaving another, deeper cut across the body. The blood shot out in a splatter and Winnipeg landed near Sloane with droplets of the stuff adorning her uniform. Outside of its tunnels, this thing is weak. I'll use my finisher next. The worm writhed, its uncontrollable tail smacking cabinets and gremlins and stalagmites into the chasm, the sizzle of its blood audible above its demonic hisses. Winnipeg stepped forward and brushed back a lock of hair, posing with gymnastic aplomb as she raised her katana and prepared her final strike against the beast. It seemed when it came to finisher moves, even Winnipeg maintained some girlish comportment. She opened her mouth to deliver the ability name.
Orask. D.
The second word caught in her throat. Her entire body went rigid and her katana plummeted from her grasp. Her eyes revolved wildly as a continuous "da" forced its way from her agape mouth. Her statuesque body trembled but made no more consequential motion. I can't move, she said. The worm's 2 wounds regenerated at once. Its body ceased thrashing and it righted itself, coiling up and raising its soulless face above them, fangs parting into a hysterical smile. The blood. Winnipeg was covered in splotches of it. Sloane had read somewhere, or seen a documentary, of natural neurotoxins designed to incapacitate and paralyze prey. Could the blood From between Worm's countless fangs poured a deluge of the same black material that had splattered from its wounds. Sloane wrapped an arm around Winnipeg's waist and hurled her away. The tiny rigid body sailed across the atrium as if gravity no longer applied to it, which with Sloane's magic was close to the truth. At the same time, her machine gun lifted from the ground and fired at the oncoming flood of vomit. The blast of light intercepted the liquid midway and atomized it in a bilious puff, but the venomous discharge only continued to flow, its volume too high for her gun to handle for long. She backflipped to the top of the cabinets behind her and slid down the opposite end. The inky torrent splashed after her, drenching the whole shelf and any misfortunate imps who had not already vacated the premises but missing her by inches. Seething and squirming, the worm undulated after her. Its noises shifted to hungry sucking sounds as some unseen nose sniffed her out. She ran around the perimeter of the atrium and turned her gun's attention toward the beast itself. Round after round of light magic pummeled against its leathery hide, only to bounce back with no perceptible damage. This was cause for concern. Her magic required heavy sustained fire to pierce anything armored. But with the worm constantly shifting its segmented body, she could hit no one spot for more than a brief moment. Winnipeg's katana was sharp enough to cleave the tube-like anatomy with a single slash. As Sloane darted between cabinets and bounded back and forth over the chasm in a desperate gambit to keep the worm preoccupied and away from where Winnipeg's immobilized body had landed, she scanned the battlefield for the sword. It wasn't in Winnipeg's outstretched arm. Had it fallen out when Sloane threw her, or had it dropped when the venom first affected her? "Where's your sword?" she asked as she slid underneath a swiping tail and somersaulted back to a sprint. "Get out of here, leave me, I lost, how did I lose to this thing, what am I even doing?" And so on, a continuous barrage of self-loathing broadcasted at full volume and with increasing acerbity as Winnipeg worked herself into a lather. So no help from her. If the katana hadn't fallen from Winnipeg's hand in flight, it must be near the atrium entrance. But the entire area was awash in a puddle of glutinous oil, from which a few frozen imps extended motionless arms like tar pit dinosaurs. She lingered a moment to search the pool in more detail and the worm came crashing at her, slamming a body segment against her. She flew forward, hit a cabinet or something, and skidded to a halt in a bed of jagged stones, her jacket and her skin a crisscrossing tableau of scrapes and gashes. She pulled herself up, disoriented. The ceiling and floor and walls and tunnels swirled around her. Out of the visual melange emerged the worm, fangs bared and ready to devour. Sloane kicked a mound of stones at the creature's face. At the same time, she directed her gun to fire at the stones. They exploded in a powdery cloud, until she remembered worms didn't use sight to sense their surroundings. She lunged aside as the worm barreled into the spot she had stood moments before. Dirt and dust rubbed into her multiple wounds and intensified the pain over the brim of her ability to dampen it. Now, instead of a numb awareness of injury, every motion she made was accompanied with physical misery. The segments of worm encircled her. Ignoring the pain, she dipped through a closing window of grey flesh and ran for the puddle of black ooze where she suspected Winnipeg's katana had fallen. Most of the viscous fluid had trickled into the central chasm, but enough of it remained to work its deleterious effects on her if touched. "Useless, useless, useless," raged Winnipeg's telepathic temper tantrum. Awash in the black lagoon was the katana. When Sloane saw it she wondered how it had taken so long, because the gleaming blade had not so much a bead of corruption upon it. It floated atop the surface, slowly spinning, catching dim light and shining it in her face. But Sloane had no way of grabbing its hilt without groping her fingers through a fistful of paralysis-inducing venom. Unless... She hooked her fingers into her overcoat and ripped it open, sending varnished brass buttons flying in every direction. The wanton destruction of her dear friend and ally pinched deep in her conscience, but she could mend it later. Unveiling a magical girl costume even she had a hard time remembering, she quickly swaddled the coat around her good arm and wrapped it tight in the fur-lined fabric to form an oversized makeshift glove. She sprinted until she reached the edge of the black pool and jumped. There was no safe landing on the other side, it was either into the mire or into the chasm. She had one chance to make this work. Her frilly golden ensemble glowed in the dimness of the cave and reflected in the oil. Sloane had a few torturous moments to gander at herself in full regalia, fighting back the urge to grimace at her ridiculousness. Then the moment passed and the katana appeared beneath her, aflame with light. She swiped the hand wrapped in overcoat and through the fabric seized the hilt. As soon as her grip was secure, she flipped in midair and employed the centrifugal force to launch the katana at the worm wraith looming up to devour her. The stainless blade sailed through the open mouth and into the lower jaw, impaling the flesh to the ground beneath it. Moments later she slammed into a cabinet covered in black blood, the splatter gumming her hair, her face, her arms, nearly every inch of bare skin her costume allowed, it allowed a lot. The paralyzing toxins traveled from nerve to synapse to brain at a breakneck pace, and before she had even ricocheted from the cabinet to the ground her limbs jammed. By then it no longer mattered. She could control her gun via telekinesis, no need for movement at all. She had given her levitating machine gun the order to focus all fire at the worm's face before the katana had even connected. With the worm's lower jaw pinned to the ground by the unbreakable sword, it had finally stopped shifting long enough for her to unleash her full power against it. The ray of corkscrewing white light drilled into the fractured epileptic face of the worm wraith. Its inhuman screech filled the entire atrium, echoing through the arches and domes until it achieved a communal shrillness, as though more than one creature were dying. Seconds passed as more and more of the all-consuming light obliterated the thing's face, forming a swirling hole of oblivion where it struck. The screech built in intensity until all at once it dispersed into only a few scattered remnants reverberating within the cavernous architecture. Soon even those died away beneath the din of the machine gun. The worm's head bulged out like a balloon and exploded. In a chain reaction, the rest of the elongated body followed. Each individual segment expanded until it could no longer contain the light and erupted into a cascade of flesh, oil, and cubes. Each eruption grew smaller as the segments tapered to the tail, and the very last segment fizzled more than exploded. The black blood the worm had spewed all over fizzled and steamed. Bit by bit, Sloane regained the ability to move and pushed herself to her feet. She sopped with the liquid, now rendered utterly benign. In fact, as she held a goo-drenched hand under her nose, she realized it really was oil. She pulled her hand away and blenched. It would take a good shower to remove it, not to mention a thorough scrubbing of her overcoat, which she unbundled and shuffled into before Winnipeg could espy her embarrassing costume. Wasn't oil corrosive? Not that it mattered much, she supposed. The fight had left her drained, but in a good way. The kind of drained you got after early morning aerobics, the kind that hurt but was okay because you knew the hurt was good for you. Not the literally about to die kind of hurt. The worm had dropped enough cubes to replenish all magic expended during the battle anyway. She threaded through the remains, plucking as many cubes as she could and applying them to her soul gem as she approached Winnipeg. The younger girl was reposed in a posture of supplication, although to what deity if any was uncertain. She had folded on her knees, her forehead against the fallow soil and her hands splayed before her. A wide, bloodshot eye stared directly into the ground and a manic scowl plastered her gaunt face.
Winnipeg? You all right?
Sloane offered a handful of grief cubes. Winnipeg's fingers curled into the dirt.
I lost. You didn't lose, said Sloane. We won. If we had lost, we'd both be dead. I deserve to be dead. You had no way of knowing its blood was poison.
Sloane's hand continued to offer cubes.
I've never seen a wraith with biology like that. Wait, you think maybe that was the Archon?
She looked around. The cave-like atrium, the chasm, the massive cabinets, even a few scurrying imps remained.
No, I guess if it were the Archon, the miasma would be gone.
But if the Archon had mere lackeys of such strength?
Being prepared for the unknowable is part of a Puella Magi's job.
Winnipeg used the fancy Latin name that Sloane had only ever heard from the lips of magical girl hipsters.
I failed. I made a mistake. I lost. Please bring me my blade.
The katana remained planted in the ground where Sloane had thrown it, growing from the soil like a steel sapling. Sloane did not like the tone Winnipeg had used to ask for it.
You're telling me you've never lost before? At anything? Not once, said Winnipeg. That is the life of a Puella Magi. Win until you lose. And when you lose, you die. That is the way it is. Bring me my blade. Look, Winnipeg. I don't have time for this shit. Or patience. I need you to maintain a semblance of sanity because right now it seems I'm surrounded by lunatics.
Sloane considered mentioning Omaha, but refrained. Plenty of time had elapsed for Omaha to drop off Delaney at the inn and return, assuming she had ever left at all. Given how the one time Omaha spoke with any intensity was when warning Sloane not to tell the others about her, Sloane had no intention of seeing what tactics the girl would employ to disallow such an occurrence. Sloane continued.
If we're going to pull this off I need someone other than myself who's not totally nuts. Please be that person. There is nothing wrong with my sanity, said Winnipeg. Nothing more than anyone else. We live in an insane world, Fargo. A transient, temporary, insane world. How are creatures predicated on order and reason and rational thought supposed to exist in such a world that has no inherent meaning whatsoever? They do it by creating meaning. Familial ties, relationships, economic success, these are what normal people, non-magical people, use as metrics of meaning. They keep those people moored. Anchored. When we made our contracts with the rat, those things were stripped from us. For the Puella Magi, only one thing matters, success. Success for the sake of success. Succeed at defeating wraiths. Succeed at defeating other Puella Magi. Succeed at acquiring territory. None of it matters beyond the fact that success means continued existence. Failure means death.
Philosophical debate was the last thing Sloane felt like right now. Although she supposed to some extent what Winnipeg said was true. She herself had ruled Minneapolis under a similar train of thought, and when she finally did lose at the hands of Claire Ibsen, she had taken a painstaking 7 months to restructure her life around the idea of undoing that failure. Undoing it by avenging herself on the one who had brought it about. Winnipeg's arm lashed out and swiped the cubes from Sloane's hand.
I am not going to commit suicide, if you are wondering.
She pressed the cubes to the necklace dangling against the dirt.
A Puella Magi has no excuse for suicide. If they truly feel such despair, the law of the cycles does the deed for them. I would like my blade back nonetheless.
Sloane sighed. As much from relief as exasperation. She pulled the sword from the dirt in a parodic twist on Arthurian legend and returned it to the world's youngest existentialist.
If I see any imminent seppuku, I'm intervening,
Sloane said. Winnipeg sheathed the blade and climbed to her feet.
I told you I would not kill myself. I do not lie. I shall simply need to redeem myself by destroying the Archon.
Awesome, said Sloane.
About that. We have a certain third-party member to discuss.
And a fourth invisible one. If she could ever be sure she was out of that one's physical or telepathic earshot, at least.
Regina Saskatoon. I assume you did not follow my advice to kill her.
Winnipeg straightened her posture and waltzed past Sloane, taking the lead toward the atrium's exit. After the worm's death, the doorway had reverted to a portal back to the main hall.
No. I conked her over the head.
Winnipeg clutched the hilt of her katana, although she did not draw it. A wan smile crept over her face.
Then let us correct your mistake.
Chapter 7, looking as if she were alive. Returning to the inn without Delaney posed a challenge. Sloane and Winnipeg clashed in both ability or style. Sloane ambled down the sidewalk pumping mortars into anything and everything, while Winnipeg blitzed across the street in a maelstrom of precision strikes and nimble acrobatics. To keep from advancing too far ahead, Winnipeg had to slow considerably, but in slowing she stripped herself of her natural advantage and had to worry about straying into Sloane's fire. Eventually Winnipeg dealt with enemies creeping from behind while Sloane forged an inexorable path onward, but fighting took major concentration and they did not speak. The whole way back Winnipeg eviscerated wraiths with extreme prejudice, her technical grace marred by a trembling intensity. By the time they trudged up the stairs of the inn and navigated the distorted corridors to their room, she convulsed with rage. With half her face lacerated and only one eye left to pinwheel fervently in her skull, she forced open the door with her katana drawn. On the bed lay Delaney, limbs akimbo and head tilted at an awkward angle on the edge of the pillow. When Sloane entered, Delaney was motionless as a corpse. But as Sloane neared with Delaney's soul gem in her pocket, an unseen defibrillator jolt seemed to resuscitate her. Although she remained unconscious, her chest heaved with labored breaths.
Wait for her to wake up,
said Sloane. Winnipeg did not seem to hear. She bent over Delaney's prone form, turned the body over, rifled through the pockets.
Where is her gem? We need her healing. She has no offensive ability, we can handle her.
From the pouch of Delaney's hoodie, Winnipeg extracted a small revolver.
No offensive ability. Ha!
She unloaded all 6 shots into Delaney's gut. Delaney jerked and shuddered as bloody red welts erupted across her body. Her eyes snapped open as she loosed an agonized, elongated sigh, coiling and contorting her body as she pressed her hands to her wounds. Winnipeg tossed the handgun into the air and bifurcated it with a swift stroke.
Where is her soul gem?
Delaney turned over and moaned, the blankets drenched in blood.
I have it,
said Sloane.
I'm not a goddamn moron. Give it to me. No.
Winnipeg rose from the bed. The furious glint in her remaining eye marked her as verging on a precipice where mental faculties switched to uncontrollable overdrive. This girl, Sloane thought, this girl cannot stand defeat, cannot stand contradiction, cannot stand lack of control. She gobbled up parcels of barren and useless territory to exert control. In Williston from the start she had tried to exert control over her peers, but very quickly her control had been usurped, by Sloane, by Delaney, by Cube, by anything and everything. Somehow, the barren nothingness of Williston was unlike the barren nothingness of Manitoba. Powerful figures had arrayed themselves here, and Winnipeg no longer held absolute dominion over the circumstances of her life. Winnipeg probably knew as little of what was really going on as Sloane less, even, because at least Sloane knew about Omaha.
Give it to me.
The lone eye roved.
I can't,
said Sloane. Winnipeg rushed her with an outstretched hand, clutching at the fluttering lapels of Sloane's overcoat. She tore yet another hole in the fur before Sloane stuck out her own hand and fired a small pulse of light directly into Winnipeg's remaining eye. Winnipeg collapsed. Her katana dropped as both hands flew to her sightless face. She writhed and screamed, kicking the ground with her stockinged legs, devolving into temper tantrum like she had during the battle with the worm. Sloane fell on her and pinned her to the ground before she could do any damage. Winnipeg's smallness surprised her, she hardly had to push her weight to keep the meager girl from moving.
Calm down. Please. Calm down.
She whispered into Winnipeg's ear, the way she used to whisper to her soul gem back in Fargo when things got especially rough.
I'll heal the blindness. Please calm down. Why does this keep happening?
Winnipeg descended into sobs.
How is this happening to me? Because you're not calm,
said Sloane.
You've been on tilt since Delaney backstabbed you.
Winnipeg blurted something completely incomprehensible. She was a fucking wreck. Smeared lavender makeup flowed down what remained of her face. Sloane resisted the urge to slap her. A slap was the thing people did in movies to calm someone down. But really a slap made someone feel even shittier. As Winnipeg teetered on hysterics, Sloane had no idea what else to do or say. Agonized words flitted out the mess of Winnipeg's mouth. Her sobbing seemed to only exasperate her further, as if she were being defeated even by herself, her own weakness. Her own secret identity as a 12-year-old girl that she usually hid. The facade of Winnipeg, governess of Manitoba, crumbled. What lay beneath was Erica Dufresne. Sloane knew these things despite lacking a direct line of sight into Winnipeg's psyche because she had felt them herself in exactly the same way.
Winnipeg, it's okay. It's okay.
She clasped her hand across both of Winnipeg's eyes. A tranquil white glow escaped the palm, bathing Winnipeg's face in a dull translucence. The magic took only moments to work. When Sloane pulled her hand away, Winnipeg could see again from both eyes. She squeezed them shut immediately.
I keep losing, over and over. There is no reason I should still be alive.
More of that melodramatic suicidal talk again. Maybe it had some weight behind it? Sloane couldn't tell. She had contemplated suicide many times in Fargo. But she never knew how seriously. Winnipeg was right, earlier if you truly wanted to die, the law of the cycles did it for you. But still, Sloane felt some kind of mentor complex kicking in. Seeing someone who had gone through the same stuff as her, who was much younger, much more distressed. She felt obliged to say something.
I know how you feel, Winnipeg,
she began, pausing to gauge Winnipeg's reaction.
Back in Minneapolis I thought I was hot shit. Nobody could fight me. Wraiths meant nothing. I had stockpiles of cubes, I had suburban girls pledging fealty, I had basically everything.
If Winnipeg heard her, she could not tell. But if she backed out of the story now, she would look like an idiot.
And then something happened. I lost. I got stabbed in the back. Not just by some lunatic, but by my best friend. My only friend. She took my cubes, took my city, almost took my life. I probably looked a lot like you right now. Falling over myself. What the fuck was the point of living, I thought, if I had to go on living in Fargo?
Winnipeg opened eyes that overflowed with derision.
You're right. What is the point?
God damn it, Sloane should have kept her mouth shut. No, wait, she could salvage it.
The point is this.
She held up her soul gem. The top half of the egg swam with muddy grime, but a golden core shone through the bottom half.
You see this? You know what this looked like when I came here? I was at the brink. The limit. The very edge of despair. Another week and the cycles would get me. But I got up. I came here. It hurt at first, but every fight I get stronger. I'll kill that Archon. And when I do, when I get that treasure trove of cubes, I'll return to Minneapolis, kill Claire Ibsen, and take everything back. Maybe when I first stumbled into Fargo, I didn't deserve to be alive. Maybe that's true. But I was alive, As long as you're alive, you still have a chance to redeem yourself.
Oh God, she hoped she sounded inspiring. Speeches were not her forte, but the words felt right to her somehow. As she neared the end, she realized they might even be true. The expression on Winnipeg's face shifted from tear-streaked self-loathing to tear-streaked apathy. She wiped her eyes with a sleeve and shrugged.
Get off me!
Sloane obliged. Winnipeg stood, brushed herself off, straightened her vest, and retreated to the bathroom with corporate efficiency. The door closed and locked behind her. Sloane listened for residual sobs, but behind the door was total silence.
Just remember, Sloane called after her, nothing's over yet. You said yourself earlier, you can still kill the Archon.
No response. Sloane took it as a good thing. No response meant Winnipeg was thinking. Winnipeg was brash and arrogant but not an idiot. She would reach the right conclusion. Sloane got up. Proud of herself. Optimistic for the first time in months. That may have been her first well-handled interpersonal connection since the days of Claire Ibsen. No, it definitely was. She turned her attention to Delaney, who writhed on the bed. The sheet rippled with the wet sheen of her blood, but she did not cry out. She kept her ragged breaths controlled and managed to shuffle her upper body upright, staring at Sloane through gritted teeth.
WH? What happened? Winnipeg got mad and shot you.
Delaney squinted an eye.
Before that, I hit you on the head because you were being crazy. Oh no.
She pulled herself up higher against the headboard. Her breathing began to regulate and she spoke with surprising perspicacity. Although she could not heal herself without her soul gem, it seemed her tolerance for pain remained massive.
I didn't mean it like that. You have to believe me, you've misunderstood everything. That's my fault, I'm so bad at getting people to understand. You tried to kill Winnipeg. No. You have it all wrong, I never intended her to die. I meant to weaken her a little, I knew she could fight that worm thing. I don't kill people anymore. Right.
Sloane decided to ignore the anymore for now.
Let's review the basics first. I have your soul gem. You can't transform without it and I can destroy it at any moment. I don't intend to destroy it, so don't give me a reason.
Delaney gulped down phlegm and dragged her knuckle against her cheek.
You're mad because I got so brusque with you, is that it? Winnipeg wants you dead. Apologize to her, not me.
Delaney hung her head and sighed.
I told you she'd be fine. Oh, Sloane love, I'm so sorry. I made a big mistake.
She spoke as if she had completely locked out the pain of the 6 slugs in her stomach. Sloane had seen girls shrug off crippling blows before, but still.
Okay,
said Sloane.
Why'd you make this big mistake, then? You babbled some zany shit before I knocked you out.
It took a long time for Delaney to respond. Beyond the bathroom door, a faucet ran.
I did it because I'm trying to do the right thing, okay? That's the reason I'm here. I don't want territory, I don't need the cubes. I want to save people. That's important to me.
Reading Delaney's expressions and body language as she uttered these words was an unreal experience, because she operated with such emphatic gestures and anguished facial contortions that she would have seemed parodic if not for the omnipresent hollowness of her eyes.
How does killing Winnipeg weakening her achieve that?
Delaney hung her head.
More people are in danger than those in Williston, love. Try all of them? All the people in the world. No, beyond that all living organisms in the universe. But Cube told me, if I helped you. And since Winnipeg was going to cut you out of the rewards.
Bingo. The exact expression Sloane had expected, Cube told me. The rat bastard had clung to Delaney the whole time.
So Cube told you if you did what he said, it'd save the universe.
Sloane sighed.
That's the most uninspired trick in his bag. To him, everything magical girls do is saving the universe. Didn't he give you the thermodynamics spiel? You know, entropy and whatnot. I know that,
said Delaney.
This is different. His energy intake is below his quota. He said his employer won't let him increase production. What we're doing is related somehow. I mean, I don't know the specifics, but...
She fell silent. She wrung her blood-stained hands together.
I thought I was doing the right thing. He can be so persuasive.
She started to sniffle, which was bizarre because by all rights her wounds should have her bawling. The Cube story made sense, but how easy it would be for Delaney to make all this up. The bathroom door opened and Winnipeg emerged. She had fixed her hair, straightened her outfit, eradicated all signs of sobbing. The jagged gash that stretched down her face had lost its swollen puffiness, she may have used weak healing magic on it. Her face had resumed its stolid demeanor, which was a relief because Sloane didn't know if she could nanny an emotional hurricane while dealing with Delaney's bullshit. Winnipeg went to the closet and severed the noose from which hung the plaid-shirted cadaver who had been there since they first entered the room. The body hit the ground with the dull thud of rigor mortis. Winnipeg dragged it by the rope, rounded the bed, opened the window, and pushed the body into the dark. No sound emanated from its fall. Winnipeg shut the window.
So you believe Regina Saskatoon's story? That she did it because Cube told her? I don't believe anything yet. You did me a favor.
Winnipeg stared out the window.
So I'll do you one. Regina Saskatoon is a murderer. First-degree magicide. 1 count confirmed, I suspect others. She is here because she derives pleasure from the misery of others.
Delaney curled her fingers into hooks.
Liar. It's all a lie, love, don't you believe her? I refuse to be drawn into a battle of name-calling,
said Winnipeg.
I spoke all I care to say on the subject.
She had said it before anyway. During the pizza debacle. It seemed like such a bold and baseless claim, with no hard evidence to prove it. Except for Delaney's questionable recent actions. And how she sometimes forgot to heal Sloane. And the empty glaze in her eyes.
I said I don't believe anything yet, said Sloane. Although if Delaney were that dangerous, Cube would have had her terminated. The point is we're fuck deep in this town with an Archon to kill. We need to work as a fucking team, no matter how much we hate each other, no matter what shit we did in the past. Yeah, maybe Delaney's killed someone. I'm no angel myself, and neither are you, Winnipeg. I never killed another magical girl. You seemed determined to break that streak none too long ago.
Sloane knew she shouldn't be trying to rile Winnipeg, but she couldn't help herself. However, Winnipeg betrayed no discomposure.
A momentary lapse of judgment instigated by extraordinary circumstances. I have no desire to slay Regina Saskatoon, despite her heinous crimes. I am here to defeat the Archon and acquire this town as territory. I merely warn you that Regina Saskatoon is dangerous and untrustworthy, and that you are well advised to ignore her crocodile tears.
Sloane jabbed her fingers into the corners of her eyes. Could they really have made no progress whatsoever? Winnipeg back to her usual insufferable self, Delaney back to her usual unsettling self, Sloane stuck in the middle. She thought she had established some sort of rapport with Winnipeg, a connection of some kind, but oh no, Winnipeg couldn't be friendly or nice or helpful, YAI too cool for that shit, so fucking edgy with her white girl katana and mysterious scar. The goodwill Sloane had mustered when Winnipeg had shown a single shred of humanity boomeranged back and smacked her in the face. From the other side of the bed, Delaney flashed Sloane a smug smile, as if in agreement with Sloane's private thoughts. But Sloane had issues with Delaney, too.
Look, said Sloane. I'm a mess. I'm covered in weird goop that worm barfed out, I'm scraped all over, and worse yet my coat's ripped. So I'll take a nice long shower and stitch up the coat and then we talk more reasonably about what next, yeah.
Neither girl spoke. Sloane gave them a moment to interject with any last-second exercises in pointlessness before she absconded to the bathroom and locked the door behind her. She resisted the urge to scream. 3 magical girls and they couldn't work together for even the smallest interval. Infighting, squabbling, petty backstabbing, foolish pride, she had dealt with this bullshit so often in Minneapolis. She had thought by unmasking them both she might make progress, but they seemed determined to make her life miserable. Not so miserable to degrade her soul gem, though. She took out her and Delaney's gems and placed them on the sink's empty soap dish. Sloane's appeared only slightly muddier than Delaney's. She didn't need the comparison to know. She felt better. Annoyed, sure. But the emptiness, the dread, the lethargy, the apathy, the irritability, the entire gambit of negative emotions were diminished. Pandora's box had opened and at its bottom she could feel the hope that remained. A hope no larger than a speck of dust, but large enough. Lukewarm water flowed from the shower nozzle. It had an acrid, sulfuric smell but it erased the oil congealing over her body. Thick splotches splattered to the tile and swirled around the drain. She tried not to ponder if Omaha were spying on her. The water droplets did not appear to bounce off any invisible girl-shaped objects, so at most she was on the other side of the curtain. The thought failed to put her at ease. "Hey," said Delaney's telepathic voice. "Sloane. You mind a chat?" "I'm planning what I'm going to do next," Sloane lied. Really, she wanted to zone out in the basic comfort of warm enough water. "Love, I haven't been quite honest with you. What Winnipeg said about me? Well, some of it is true. I did murder someone, long ago." "I killed a girl once," said Sloane. "In Minneapolis. A Chicagoland reject. She thought she could usurp me. She tried to kill me, I killed her instead." Delaney did not respond right away. Magicides were a touchy subject. Under certain circumstances Cube considered them permissible. For instance, when terminating a girl he marked as dangerous. Or in self-defense. Other than that, they were pretty taboo. For Cube, of course, the reason was all business. Girls killing girls cut the return on his investment. Hence, the deal he proposed to Sloane, he would permit her to kill Claire Ibsen, but only if she first harvested the Cube gold mines in Williston. If she weren't making Cube a net gain in terms of energy, her drive to kill Claire would certainly be cause to consider her for termination. Now that Sloane thought about it, she really was prime termination material. Her sole goal in life was to commit a magicide, after all. She had always operated under an unspoken assumption that her vendetta against Claire Ibsen was justified, and she definitely still felt that way, but did Cube? To him, Claire Ibsen was a docile, cooperative, and productive girl. And what was Sloane? None of those adjectives, to be sure. Meanwhile, Cube had apparently exhorted Delaney to kill Winnipeg. And Delaney herself had obvious problems. All three of them were girls Cube, under normal circumstances, might want removed. And here they were, brought together by his puppetry, programmed to distrust, possibly even kill. And when the Archon was dead, who was lurking the shadows to finish the survivors and reap the spoils? Who had an ambiguous friend feeding her orders? Mother. Fucking. Omaha. Her ability to ponder this realization was stifled as Delaney resumed her spiel. "Well. Winnipeg probably told you a lot of other things about me, and a lot of them were lies. Most of them, even. But some were maybe true." Sloane and Delaney's soul gems sat unprotected on the soap dish of the sink, where any nearby invisible girls could crush them. Sloane restrained herself from bursting out the shower to scoop them up. Omaha wasn't going to strike now. No, not when they were still useful. Not when they still had to kill the Archon. "It started when I was younger. I mean, I don't want to justify what I did by saying something awful happened to me so what I did was okay. That's not what I'm saying. I just want you to know I didn't, like, emerge from a vacuum and murder someone. I'll spare you the details, but my stepfather." "Delaney, I'm sure your tragic backstory is super fucking tragic, but is now a good time?" The important thing was to not let on she had figured out Omaha. As long as she kept doing what Cube wanted her to do, i.e. slay wraiths acquire cubes, Omaha would remain Sloane's little guardian angel, lopping off the hands of all who would do her harm. But somehow she needed to inform Delaney and Winnipeg. "You're right, I should get to the point. The point being that when I contracted, I was wrong in the head. I didn't wish for a puppy. Even telepathic channels of communication weren't safe. Strong magical girls could detect private lines, and Cube could reroute thoughts to whoever he wanted. But Omaha was always watching, so physical channels were no bueno. Before I contracted, I met the girl in Saskatoon. I was in Regina, she was in Saskatoon. She was a very nice girl. Her name was Claudia. I don't know her last name." Omaha could turn invisible, but she still had physical needs. Food, sleep. She had to go to the bathroom at some point. There would be a window, no matter how fleeting, where Sloane could warn Delaney and Winnipeg. Then they could plan a contingency. Claudia had no family, she originated from Seattle I think. She didn't go to school and had no friends. Except for her dog. She loved her dog. A little beagle, easy to care for, easy to keep in her apartment. Always wagging his tail and begging to be petted. He wore a red bandana around his neck, like the mascot in a kids' camp movie. Sloane turned the water off, her skin thoroughly scourged. The logistics didn't work. Even if Sloane could speak to her companions unfettered for 5 minutes, how could she relate the situation and engineer a plan in so short a time? I remember the whole time I talked to her, when she explained what being a magical girl entailed, just thinking how pointless and pathetic her life was. Where her sole reason for existing and continuing to live was because of this stupid dog. Drying off with a towel, Sloane casually extended her arms around the narrow confines of the bathroom to see if she could bump Omaha. But the room was empty. But then I reflected on myself. Yeah. And I realized I didn't even have a stupid dog. I had jack fucking shit. I had a tragic backstory, and yes, it was super tragic. Thank you very much for your concern, Sloane love. I had a tragic backstory and not a thing else in the world. Once dry, Sloane examined her coat. Several rips. Buttons would need to be reattached. Could be worse. The third night after I met Claudia, I made my wish to Cube. I could totally lie to you and I say I wished to kill my stepdad. That's the kind of thing where, it's still a pretty lousy thing to wish, but it's understandable, it's something you could see a normal person doing, considering what he did to me. I didn't wish for that, though. I wished I could kill Claudia's dog. Sloane looked up from the magical threads she had employed to stitch the holes in her coat, working at the assiduous pace her meager mastery allowed. The dog. And not just kill it. I wished Claudia would be forced to watch as I killed her dog. That she'd be powerless to stop me. That's Christ. What's worse is when I did it, I enjoyed it. A lot. Too much. Delaney relayed this information in utter monotony. It happened in Claudia's apartment. I knocked on the door like I had done before, like I wanted to chit-chat about how wraiths worked and how many cubes they dropped and all that technical asininity that had been the sole thread of our so-called friendship. As soon as she let me in, I sealed her behind a barrier. And I grabbed the dog. The stitch work on Sloane's coat continued sorcerer's apprentice style. Holes, rips, and tears zipped up and left no trace of ever having existed. Since I'm being totally honest with you to gain your trust, I should mention I do have offensive magic. It's more devious than devastating. I could obviously never go toe-to-toe with you or Winnipeg. It takes the form of a small dagger, the weapon of an assassin, a murderer. Even my subconscious or whatever wizardry determined my magical girl ensemble knew my game from the get-go. The worst of the damage had healed, but Sloane kept working on the coat anyway, obviating small frays around the threadbare hem, redoing the serviceable embroidery on the cuffs. She had not expected this story. At all. Magicide usually meant you, betrayed someone for their territory. Like what Claire had basically done to Sloane, minus the actual killing. This was like a serial killer thing. Why kill the goddamn dog? What was the motive? Jealousy? Of someone's pet? I took my time. I enjoyed it. False starts, small nicks, torturing Claudia as I drew the knife point to the dog's throat only to pull it back at the last moment. It exhilarated me, thrilled me. She had an exquisite agony on her face, a despair tempered by the hope with which I imbued her every time I spared it, the dog yipping and growling but mostly not even there, like I was holding a toy or something. That was exactly how I conceived the situation. Holding a toy. Soon even the detail work on the coat was finished and Sloane had no more excuses to waste magic on it. She sat cross-legged in the tight quarters of the bathroom, wedged between the sink and the shower, listening as Delaney transmitted bizarre thoughts into her head. Obviously, I eventually killed it. Not sure how long it took. Then I burst the bubble around Claudia. Some part of me expected she would kill me after I did it, even when I made the wish. I would do something truly awful and unjustifiable, and retribution would drop swiftly and mercilessly and eradicate my miserable existence from the world. Creative suicide, so to speak. Or maybe I knew I would kill Claudia after the dog all along. The thing about me is that I don't understand me. Well, the point was moot because when I let Claudia out she didn't even fight. She sagged to her knees and sobbed, totally pathetic, tears all over the place, clinging to the corpse of this dog, cradling it like a baby. I knew very little about the law of the cycles but I could see she was toast soon. So, I dunno. I killed her too. At the time, I didn't see why not. Sloane held her coat close. Her eyes drilled into the benign tile pattern that adorned the floor. Delaney. This is fucked up. Yeah. I guess you're right. I mean, I know you're right. I'm fucked up. I still am. Secretly, deep down, I replay those moments in my head and get, satisfaction. I dunno. Sloane said nothing. I probably would have turned into a serial killer or whatever after that. I had an abstract conception that what I did was really really bad, but I felt it didn't matter. It made me feel good, and nobody could catch me. What can society do when the murder weapon is magic? So I was scot-free, right? She punctuated with a little chuckle. Nope. Turns out someone was watching. And that someone was God. God. The word sounded foreign. Sloane's experience with God was a vapid, minor swear word with the semantic meaning of damn or fuck. Before my divine punishment, I fancied myself an atheist. The way it's trendy for disillusioned kids like you and me to forswear religion. But in retrospect it's pretty obvious that not only does God exist, but we're her little Christs, swallowing up the world's misery until we are ignoble end. So God's a chick now. Sloane dragged her fingers through her freshly dried, unbrushed hair. Was this conversation meant to get Sloane to trust Delaney? Because damn had it failed. You don't see any magical boys, do you? It only makes sense for God to sacrifice those she loves the most. I must have angered her greatly. To see someone entrusted with spreading hope and joy and all that good stuff turn around and immediately contribute to the very evil they're supposed to fight. I didn't even have the excuse of corruption or disenfranchisement or whatever happened to make you so salty, Sloane. I popped out the oven already vile. So she punished me. She descended an archon upon me. Sloane held Delaney's soul gem in her hand. She turned over the ovular ruby, felt its smoothness with her thumb. So easy to crush. At this point, it would do Delaney a favor. The girl had clearly lost her mind. The immediacy with which it happened brokers no doubt that the archon came because of what I did. By the time I departed Claudia's apartment the sky had darkened and a melancholic chill pervaded the air. It makes sense, of course. Archons are manifestations of the greatest depths of human sin and despair, right? And what I had done was very sinful indeed. That's how I know there has to be a God, and that she's a magical girl or something akin to that. Because what the hell even is sin? How do you define it? For a concept of sin to exist, it means there is some governing entity on a plane above our own who decides what it is. It means our world has meaning. Isn't that fantastic, Sloane? Until I became a magical girl and did one of the worst things anyone could ever do, at least in the eye of a god whose chief concern was the doings of magical girls, I had operated under the steadfast belief that the world had no intrinsic value. That it simply existed, and anything anyone did was pointless and useless. In essence, murdering Claudia's dog and then Claudia herself tested that theory. Sloane said nothing. Somehow, she could not bring herself to destroy Delaney's soul gem. But I swear. I absolutely swear. I have never killed another living thing since that day. Since the Archon descended to punish me. This is the point I'm trying to make, Sloane. I did an awful thing. A truly awful thing, that I cannot excuse or forget or ignore. I did that awful thing because I'm an awful person. But since that day, since that affirmation of God's existence, I have dedicated myself to doing good deeds. Because that's what this universe means. Girls like you and me fight to do good deeds. I understand now that I am the plaything of an infinitely powerful deity, who can crush me at any moment. To serve this deity, to curry her favor, to make her happy. That's our purpose. And if I do good deeds, even if I'm a bad person, even if I feel no emotion for doing those deeds, even if it makes me physically ill to so constantly smile and act friendly and save lives and heal bruises, if I do good deeds, can I still truly be a bad person? Can I, Sloane? She asked as if she needed her confirmation. Sloane imagined if she simply said yes, it would pull the pin out of Delaney and annihilate her utterly. Sloane didn't say yes. She stood up and unfolded the jacket she had folded and refolded 20 times during Delaney's confession. She slid into it, buttoning it all the way and pocketing both soul gems. She couldn't say yes because she didn't believe it. What Delaney had told her was odious in a way sharply personal to Sloane. It reeked of betrayal, to inflict such wanton and pointless pain on a girl who had mentored you and taught you the ropes. But when Delaney spoke of God with such a quavering, impassioned voice, the way she had been unable to speak of anything before, Sloane knew that despite how insane it sounded, Delaney truly believed it. That her real reason for coming to Williston had been to do good deeds, to save people, to seek redemption for an irredeemable past. And there was something good in that, something worth doing. Or maybe Delaney had lied out her ass, and Sloane wasn't as good at seeing through bullshit as she thought. She opened the bathroom door defensively in case Delaney awaited in ambush. She didn't. She lay face down on the bed, her face buried in the pillow.
My hope is, said Delaney, my hope is one day I do enough good deeds I actually feel something good inside myself when I do them. Genuine feeling, not rote action.
Sloane didn't respond, only partially because she lacked the equipment to discuss philosophy and morality with Delaney. The main reason was because Winnipeg was no longer in the room.
Where'd she go?
Sloane asked. Delaney rolled over. The blood on her stomach had staunched.
She left, love. As soon as you got in the shower. By herself. There's nobody else, is there?
Only weird invisible Omaha, waiting for them to kill the Archon. Sloane decided to worry about Omaha later. At least for now, she was helpful. Her hypothetical betrayal was predicated on them defeating the Archon in the first place, far from certainty. Delaney rolled over with melancholy scrawled across her features.
Does it matter, love? Winnipeg's hated us since the moment she arrived. I'm honest when I say she's better off on her own. Besides, we make a good team, don't we? You kill the enemies and I protect you. Where I'm weak, you're strong. And vice versa. Right now you're not strong in much of anything.
Sloane examined the window as if Winnipeg may have left a clue about her departure. She didn't understand. She thought her heart-to-heart with Winnipeg had been pretty conclusive or whatever. Fuck. Even in Minneapolis her sole point of contact with humanity had been through Claire Ibsen, to whom she had entrusted all the managerial bullshit necessary to run an American metropolis, like dealing with nomads and ensuring the suburban chicks didn't kill each other. The woeful inadequacy of her interpersonal skills stood bare and exposed before her. She wondered if she had missed a point somewhere in Delaney's rambling exposition, like maybe Delaney was trying to do something other than paint herself as a dangerously deranged individual. Frustration seeped into Sloane as she tried to comprehend. In Delaney's defenseless position, her obvious goal should have been to worm her way back into Sloane's confidence and retrieve her soul gem. Her story had not done that. Or had it? What had it done, exactly?
If you really want, said Delaney, you could go after her. Most likely she went to the second place on our list, the school. You told that story to distract me, said Sloane. Keep me occupied so Winnipeg could slink away.
Delaney shook her head.
At first, maybe. I dunno. I thought I'd get you to like me. Winnipeg must have told you something, so I thought I'd defend myself. But I guess what I did was pretty indefensible? I knew that, but I said the whole story anyway. Once I started, it was hard to stop. I've never told anyone before. People usually learn through Cube. And you say you're here in Williston, fighting the Wraiths, for atonement?
The word atonement sparked a light in Delaney's eyes. She scrambled forward on the bed and kneeled before Sloane, hands clasped, ignoring her wounds.
Yes. That's it exactly. I did something awful. Unjustifiably awful, by the laws of the God who governs this universe. I recognize that, I admit it. But if there's no hope of redeeming myself, why am I still alive? God gave me a message when the Archon descended on Saskatoon. You have to believe me. I want to save the universe, the people, everyone.
Sloane pressed her forehead against the window. Frigid condensation left a wet imprint on her skin. Her hand reached into her pocket, took out Delaney's soul gem, and tossed it to her.
I don't know if I believe you. At best, I might believe that you believe yourself, but that only makes you crazy.
She rose from the window, watching Delaney with wary eye as she transformed to her magical girl costume, the flowing white robe harboring a vaguely bridal connotation.
I'm giving you back your soul gem because I don't have a choice. Winnipeg's gone and I can't do this myself.
In mere moments Delaney healed her wounds and cleared the blood that covered the bed. Seconds passed and Delaney did not lash out, did not summon menacing bubbles, did not attempt to restrain or maim or kill Sloane, only got off the bed and stretched her arms and donned her socialite smile in all its disingenuous glory and reverted her eyes to their pleasant but lusterless glow.
Well, shall we make for the school, love?
Sloane summoned her machine gun and flung open the door.
Yeah, guess so.
Chapter 8, Omit Needless Words. The head of a wraith, still leering, sailed from its body and rolled across the cobblestone. Both it and the body vanished in a puff, leaving behind a pittance of glittering cubes. Like proverbial zombies, the wraith weak point was the head. Given enough force, any attack would prove fatal, but in protracted battle efficiency counted for everything. Winnipeg carved a path through the main quad up to the school entrance with a series of cuts performed more through muscle memory than cognizant neural messaging. While Winnipeg's muscles moved, her head drifted elsewhere. She knew she needed to return to reality. That this kind of mental weakness, everywhere weakness, had led to the rapid deterioration of her ability and her confidence, the two not mutually exclusive, and put her in the straits she now found herself. Her soul gem had dipped below peak condition and cubes were not helping much. The breached permafrost of her mind revealed long-buried skeletons grinning from disturbed graves. Fargo had meant well, but she was a total dunce, so all she had done was expose the question at the center of every Puella Magi's life: what are you alive for? If one could not answer that question, the despair began. A Puella Magi minus a purpose was a Puella Magi minus a soul. The answer did not need to be elaborate. A goal of reclaiming the life they once led as a bland but content teenager was enough for a while. But for these Puella Magi, eventually the inability to return to their old life became undeniable. One by one, they grew alienated from their old friends, their old family, their old ambition. They either found a better purpose or died. Winnipeg, née Erica de Fresnay, contracted at 12 and made a 12-year-old's lousy wish, that Stuart Wibbo, the attractive and sociable lacrosse captain upperclassman, loved her. The wish worked. He did love her. He still loved her, probably, wherever he was. She could not fault Cubay's implementation of the wish, which in Arabian Nights' careful what you wish for jinn might have carried out in any number of unsavory ways ranging from obsession to abduction. Stuart truly cared for her, was kind to her, respected her wants. She lasted one blissful month as she danced through Ottawa's agents of despair under the tutelage of an apathetic veteran named Gatineau who called her fille with barely concealed disdain. In that month, everything was shoe-wet. Her Puella Magi outfit made her look like a goddess, no longer a plain and awkward girl with braces who stuttered. She carved things with a katana straight from a manga and during the day hung out with Stuart in romantic harmony. Everything went so well she did not even notice her slow estrangement from her friends and family. Or maybe she did notice, but didn't care. Because she had Stuart, right? Perfect, kind, thoughtful Stuart. He didn't scold her for coming home late, he didn't pester her incessantly why she came to school with bags under her eyes. He didn't ask about the old Erica, not like he had known her anyway, or shove a report card in her face and explode with insults. He held her hand and kissed her and brought her flowers and chocolates and massaged her shoulders and opened doors, and even when he politely asked if she wanted to sleep with him and she got scared and said no, he remained respectful, caring, and kind, never broaching the subject afterward. So of course she got bored. The hormonal impulses she had mistaken as love wore off. For a time she continued under the desperate hope that her growing apathy was a mere lull, a rut she could escape. Months passed. The rut deepened. Gatineau's sarcastic remarks, previously ineffectual, began to bite. Apathy became hatred as Stuart continued to be kind and polite and respectful no matter how much she spurned him, no matter how much she denigrated him. She refused to admit she had made a mistake and so blamed him for everything. He was too perfect, too obliging, she needed push and pull. Once, he missed a scheduled date because of a legitimate sickness and she latched onto the incident as if it were reprovable failure. She screamed at her parents, she screamed at her teachers, she screamed at chain-smoking Gatineau, she screamed at anyone who tried to help. She told Stuart to leave her alone and never talk to her again, and the next week a gang of Stuart's lacrosse buddies surrounded her and said Stuart wasn't even eating anymore, and eventually her guilt and self-loathing consumed her and she made an effort to be nice that lasted a week before she couldn't stand him again. Her soul gem got scary dark. She spent longer and longer nights prowling the ghettos of Ottawa for increasing quantities of cubes. Once she attacked a man who tried to kidnap her, or worse, and ran away unsure if she had killed him. Exhaustion compiled her worries. Gatineau, who never seemed to despair at all, guffawed in her face. A choice presented itself: find a better purpose or die. The real-life Winnipeg blinked and discovered herself inside a classroom for giants. Desks coated in graffiti and bubblegum towered like fairytale forest mushrooms. Discarded textbooks formed immense mezzanines across a linoleum flatland. Tepid and isolated wraiths peeked behind the few instances of cover. Grief cubes from her previous onslaught formed a geometric swath behind her. The last few minutes had been totally lost to her while she dredged up last year's melodrama. She slaughtered the nearest wraith with a special prejudice, chiding herself for succumbing to her own mental labyrinth. That was despair, to not only have no hope for the future but no solace in the past, because when you retreated there in hope of something better than the rapidly deteriorating present, you found only a catalogue of old failures, mishaps, and tragedies magnified to mythic proportions like the desks and chairs and chalkboards around her. One part of her couldn't believe how pathetically weak she was acting, recoiling into an emotional mire from the slightest of provocations, the most minor and most rectifiable of failures. Another part countered that if the glass tower of her mental fortitude showed cracks at such trivialities, it must have been founded on the shakiest of precipices to begin with. which almost sent her back into the maze to contemplate how she had abandoned Ottawa without a word to her parents, her friends, or Stuart Wibbo, and how she had come to Winnipeg, which some kind of Puella Magi social media site said had an opening, and how she had fought about 20 competitors for the right to rule, but at the most dangerous moment of needing to replay her own backstory in search of something to which she could latch, she wrenched herself away and eviscerated another wraith. Idiot, fight. Focusing 100% of her faculties on technical skill, Winnipeg whipped through the enormous classroom at gale force velocity. Cleaving wraiths left and right, she exited into a topsy-turvy hallway lined with rattling lockers. A circus of wraiths clogged the immense space, multitudes of generic humanoids and human-headed animals. Lions, serpents, jackals, locusts, hellhounds, a litany of mankind's historic and imagined scourges, bearers of plague and pestilence. So they thought they could overwhelm her with numbers, did they? Allowing herself a cold chuckle at their hubris, she stepped forward and raised her sword high. Her magical energies gathered as she prepared her most devastating attack, the pocket ace she held for when speed, strength, and wits were not enough. The finisher that had never failed to incapacitate her opponent, no matter their defensive magic, no matter their agility. Normally she would not resort to it so early, but she felt like massacring this assemblage of wraiths who so feebly believed they stood a chance against her. As a violent cyclone began to form around her upraised blade, she shouted, "Barask! Winnipeg? Winnipeg, are you there?" The unexpected telepathic intrusion shattered her concentration. Her words caught in her throat and the tornado fizzled into a few stray gusts. She sprinted back the way she came with the entire wraith armada in pursuit. What perfectly inauspicious timing, Fargo. "Where are you?" replied Fargo's voice. "This place is massive." In a hallway. Now a classroom. Winnipeg decided to be irritated rather than consider the implications of being yet again in danger with Fargo in position to help her. Although if not for Fargo's interruption, her finisher would have lived up to its name. "Is Regina Saskatoon with you?" "Yeah. I gave her back her soul gem, sorry." She did not sound sorry. "We have to work as a team. The fact that I of all people am saying this is all the proof you need." Winnipeg skirted a corner and whipped her blade around to slice a sphinx that had caught up to her. "No, Fargo. You need us to work as a team, so you can get your cubes. You are not strong enough to defeat the Archon without me. But I..." "Don't give me this shit, Winnipeg. If you would swallow your pride for 5 seconds." Winnipeg knocked back an onrushing regiment with a miniature hurricane of wind magic. "And Regina Saskatoon wishes to work together as well. What a quick turn for her, considering not an hour ago she had sealed me into a tunnel with a carnivorous worm." Regina Saskatoon's voice chimed in. "I'm really sorry for that, Winnipeg. You probably won't believe me, but I truly didn't mean for you to die. I just wanted you out of the way." It was such a ridiculously flimsy excuse that Winnipeg spat a laugh even as she hacked the wraiths encircling her. "And you believe that, Fargo?" "I don't care. I want the Archon dead and the 3 of us to walk away alive, never to speak again. Now can you give us some more exact whereabouts?" "We're in classroom 103. A plaque high overhead read room 501. Winnipeg ducked into the corresponding class and weaved between the titanic chairs and desks. She lashed back with erratic and unpredictable strikes to thin the horde at her back. "I'm on the other side of campus. Give us a number. Please." A naga fell shrieking in several squirming parts. 501. "Happy?" Apparently, because they resumed radio silence. Winnipeg backflipped off a post and continued her slaughter. As long as she kept moving, they could not touch her no matter their numbers. The dregs of fiendish grimoires tore at her shadow with tooth, claw, and talon. She knew after a few moments of testing the strength of her collective foe she had no need for her finisher. Her natural ability, which Cubey had extolled when she made her wish, would suffice. She darted between the behemoths, the colossi, the leviathans, literally entering her element, literal as in alchemic, not periodic, to facilitate her accelerated travel between adversaries, eliminating weaker wraiths in droves and saving the larger Lovecraftian types for last to maintain a sense of urgency, a building of tension, which as she escalated from wights to manticores to eldritch squids built and built and built until, after a climactic and too short battle with the Dullahonic envoy of Hades propelled by 4 fire-snorting steeds lashed to a careening chariot, she finally returned to Earth and stood silent amid a field of grief cubes, dwarfed by the gigantic expanse of desks and chairs that loomed from the dark like Doric columns of a Greco-Roman temple. She heaved great quantities of air into her lungs. Sweat dripped from her brow as she made one final assessment of the area to confirm all wraiths lay slain. Wiping her forehead with the back of her hand and sheathing her sword, she scooped a handful of cubes, held them to her soul gem, and watched with cathartic satisfaction at the literal purging of her grief, which now seemed so simple, so trivial. That was the way to do it. Don't think, just fight. Why seek solace in the past? The only solace she needed was her ability. Her soul gem purified fully with only a few cubes, even though it had remained mudded with many more cubes not long prior. This felt normal, as if the cubes were mere placebos for an underlying cancer it was her prerogative to control. She wondered what exactly had happened to Fargo for her to teeter on a ravine of despair for 7 straight months with neither damnation nor amelioration. From what Cube explained, Minneapolis had deliberately spared Fargo, a kindness most traders rarely gave. The idea that Fargo could dwell in such stagnation after overcoming the initial hump of despair her embarrassing defeat deserved seemed unreal, scornful. With impeccable timing, Fargo and Regina Saskatoon emerged in the gaping doorway.
You did it!
Regina Saskatoon said. Her voice remained clear even at great distance and through the miasma.
See? You're too strong to die to wraiths.
You find the Archon? Said Fargo. No, said Winnipeg. If I had, you would not need to ask. She did not cross the linoleum mesa to meet them. Instead, she waited for them to come to her, buying time to conceive of a plan for Regina Saskatoon. The sociopath disgusted her, but did not scare her. Even if she wormed her way into Fargo's heart, Winnipeg had unshakable faith that her finisher could obliterate both girls at once. If it came to that. Regina Saskatoon, like all narcissists, was a coward. And Fargo had too much at stake to try something so foolish. Now that Winnipeg had reasserted her dominance while Punch and Judy toddled several steps behind, any meager threat or unease brought by their presence vanished entirely. She took a single step in their direction and the ground shattered. Stellate cracks spread across the entire plateau, curling between the desks and chairs, spreading into ravines of chalky dust into which grief cubes tumbled. Momentous chunks of earth broke and plummeted into an unseen abyss. Everything trembled as the monumental school furniture tilted and toppled. Winnipeg's reflexes activated. She bounded from her own schism of land to the next descending block, playing a platform game with a killer time limit. While she flitted from piece to piece, Fargo and Regina Saskatoon floundered near the edge of the cataclysm, running into one another and treading on their toes and falling over. For Winnipeg, time elongated. The clear safest path across the obstacle course of rock and tile presented itself as if illuminated by a rippling current. Beside her, a tremendous fount of gravelly sand burst between the cracks. A high-pitched, wailing screech pierced the denuded soundscape as from the spray surfaced a scuttling, clicking, clacking thing of spindly legs and awesome claws, its face humanoid save the 2 long stalks protruding from its sockets, adorned with beady eyes awash in static flicking back and forth to survey the terrain. It was a giant lobster. Armor plated its humped back, its tail swishing as it went airborne above her. A massive shadow obscured her route along the falling platforms. Winnipeg continued on memory and instinct. She hastened as she realized the lobster wraith, could it not have picked a more majestic creature, was attempting to land on her. As the lobster loomed, the platforms disappeared entirely within its darkened shadow. Her mind whirred with calculations and projections for the ground's future movements. Every time her foot landed, it hit something solid. She was almost out from under the beast. Then her foot landed and hit only air. She lurched forward from the unexpected development as her mind calibrated to seek an alternate landing. She was certain if she only deepened the oblique of her descent she would hit the next block and be poised to resume her advancement toward flat Earth, where she could turn and fight the lobster. Instead, however, a bright red bubble ballooned beneath her foot. She bounced skyward, her ankle twisting from the sudden contact, although not painfully enough to deter her from reaching the next block and launching forward. She broke from beneath the beast's shadow moments before it smashed through the remnants of the ground. The 2 stooges floated in a giant bubble nearby. Wow! What a monster, said Regina Saskatoon. Good thing I helped you with that bubble, right Winnipeg? By the time she had finished, her viscous words slow and elongated in Winnipeg's heightened state of perception, Winnipeg reached the doorway of the classroom, where the shattered earth ended. Behind her, rocks fell. The lobster disappeared into the darkness. Regina Saskatoon's bubble drifted beside her and popped in a torrent of blood. Fargo landed on her back while Regina Saskatoon placed a graceful heel upon the ground. Fargo quickly righted herself and manifested her machine gun.
Is that the Archon? It's certainly something, isn't it?
Said Regina Saskatoon. A massive claw burst from the void and hammered down to crush them. Winnipeg dove to the side while Regina Saskatoon did some bubble voodoo to keep her and Fargo from dying. With another beached wail shriek, the lobster re-emerged from the darkness, probing with the distorted orbs of its eyes. Winnipeg didn't like those eyes. She leapt onto the claw wedged firmly in the ground and cleaved them from its face with one swipe of her sword. The lobster didn't even recoil. Its jaw unhinged and a serpentine tongue lolled out, dripping with caustic saliva. Winnipeg jumped again but boinged against the side of another bloody bubble. She lurched in another direction only to hit another wall. On all sides were bloody red walls. The fucking cunt had put her inside a bubble. Don't worry, Winnipeg. It can't hurt you as long as you're in my bubble. Ah, said Winnipeg. The slippery tongue coiled around the bubble, coating it in unctuous ooze. Once it had a solid grip, it began to reel the entire bubble with Winnipeg trapped inside toward its cavernous mouth. Fargo must have remembered she existed because a dazzling bright line cleaved the monster's tongue. Winnipeg, the bubble, and the severed bit of black flesh flopped to the ground and started to roll. Winnipeg railed against her confines with the katana, hacking and slashing, deflected at every turn by the wobbling walls of blood.
Let me out, let me out!
She screamed. The bubble burst. Winnipeg zipped aside to avoid getting wet and reassessed the battle. The lobster wraith clung to the edge with one claw firmly entrenched, the other swinging with ponderous slowness. She readied to return to the fray, but Fargo had already positioned herself before the lobster. Round after round of gunfire pelted the thing directly in its idiotic face. After a few seconds of sustained fire, the face completely caved in. Its head became a misshapen lump of grey matter as Fargo continued unrelenting. It tried to swipe at them but its motions were so sluggish and delayed that even Fargo had no difficulty evading, not even having to stem her fire. The lobster howled, shivered, and expired. Its body slumped forward against the edge of the precipice, its head bowed in monkish repose. Regina Saskatoon ran up and high-fived Fargo.
That was great, love. You made it seem easy. Your magic is really powerful.
Like Fargo did anything special. She had stood almost perfectly still and pressed the trigger of her gun. With such a large target, not even her aim was commendable. And if not for Regina Saskatoon's meddling. The lobster's head burst like an oversized egg sac and 1,000 parasites scuttled forth on frantic, reedy legs. Fargo raised her gun but it had already revved down from its previous usage. Regina Saskatoon lurched back in stereotypical female response to arachnids. The loose tide swarmed toward them, each creeping thing adorned with a miniature wraith head, distorting the entire edge of the precipice with their static. Winnipeg sprinted forward, dove between her hapless companions, and drove her katana into the ground. She focused her magic energies into the blade, as though she were about to use her finisher, but instead she launched a gale-force spiral of wind into the ragged floor. Immense cracks streaked through the linoleum before a massive chunk of ground blasted back in a mighty gust, taking with it the 1,000 scuttling parasites. They sailed backward into the void, turning and flipping and squealing with their little wraith faces as their minuscule bodies melded into the darkness and disappeared forever. The lobster wraith's headless corpse trembled and plummeted into the abyss as it disintegrated into cubes, leaving only the 3 Puella Magi to survey the aftermath.
Well,
said Regina Saskatoon.
That was quite a shock.
Winnipeg stood up and brushed dust from her vest. She whipped her arm out and decapitated Regina Saskatoon with one swift stroke. The head hit the ground and tumbled away while the body slumped to its knees and plopped forward, spouting blood from the stump of the neck.
What the fuck?
Said Fargo.
What the fuck? She just helped you.
She hoisted her gun and pointed it at Winnipeg. Winnipeg remained perfectly still, posed at the end of her stroke with blood running down her blade.
Do you know,
said Winnipeg,
how sometimes you become very, very frustrated, and even though you know it will not harm him in the least, not even scratch his indomitable nigh immortality, you vent your rage on one of Cubé's bodies.
Fargo gaped at her, uncomprehending. Regina Saskatoon's body continued to spasm blood on the ground.
Hurry up and fix yourself, said Winnipeg.
As if on command, a bubble formed around Regina Saskatoon's head, which had traveled some distance. The bubble rose into the air and ferried the head back to the body, spinning a little to line up correctly before pressing the 2 ends of the neck back together. The bubble popped and the resulting blood flow was enough to eradicate any trace of a wound. Regina Saskatoon pushed herself to her feet, cracked her neck, and fixed her hair.
I'd rather not become your chew toy, Winnipeg.
Winnipeg flicked the blood from her sword and sheathed it.
Would you prefer if I rammed my blade through the gem on your shoulder? I wouldn't be so keen to stand by idly and allow that,
said Regina Saskatoon.
Remember, I'm no helpless damsel myself.
She retrieved a handheld mirror from somewhere in the folds of her gown and inspected her neck.
I don't understand, said Fargo. Delaney helped you that fight, Winnipeg. Are you still mad at what she did in the city hall? It should be obvious by now. We need to stop dicking around and work together already.
The school hallway remained gigantic and tinged with an unpleasant aura. Which meant the lobster had not been the Archon, surprise, but merely another greater wraith. Winnipeg started down the hall to cover the rest of the school, although she harbored little hope she would find what she wanted. She doubted also the third location on Regina Saskatoon's map, the airstrip, which was too open an area for something that supposedly wanted to remain unseen. Perhaps Regina Saskatoon simply had no clue what she was talking about at all. Fargo scampered after her.
Hello? We're having a conversation here? Can we maybe talk for 5 minutes and at least settle on a truce? The wraiths are too strong for any of us alone. Oh, but your magic is so powerful, Sloane love,
said Winnipeg. She pressed her hands to her cheeks and loosed a fangirl squee.
You made short work of that lobster. You're just the greatest, why don't the two of you make out already?
As soon as she said it, she regretted it. She turned away from Fargo and Regina Saskatoon so as to not see the smug satisfaction assuredly etched on their faces at such a juvenile outburst. If only the hallway were not so long and empty so she could pretend she had anything better to do.
Is that the issue? Said Fargo. This isn't a fucking talent show. If anything, that fight proves we need to stick together. We all contributed. All your girlfriend did was impede my progress, said Winnipeg. Trap me in bubbles and get in my way. 1. I don't like her any more than you do. Sorry, Delaney, it's true. You kinda weird me out, actually. Second, I'm pretty sure if not for her bubbles that thing would have gotten its tongue around you.
The whole time, Regina Saskatoon followed behind. Her heels clopped, but otherwise she made no interjection. If not for her bubble I would have dodged the tongue. It was moving fast, said Fargo. I would have dodged it. Okay, maybe. Fargo got in front of her and attempted to establish eye contact. Winnipeg tried to avoid it, but Fargo always seemed to know which way she was about to avert her gaze. But to me it looked like you were in trouble. I'd have done the same. I would have dodged it. Fargo sighed and threw up her hands. Okay, fine. Whatever. You would have fucking dodged it. Congratulations. Delaney made a mistake. Can I say something? Said Regina Saskatoon. She remained behind Winnipeg, out of sight, and cleared her throat. Sloane's absolutely correct. I've made many mistakes. I keep making mistakes, even though every time I make one I tell myself it's the last. I swear I didn't mean ill when I put up that barrier. I only wanted to help. If she had sniffled or forced back a tear, even Fargo's suspension of disbelief would have had to break, but Regina Saskatoon allowed her spiel to end with a mere dwindling of her voice. Wise. We have another location to search, said Winnipeg. We go to the airstrip next. No, said Fargo. You can't keep doing that thing where whenever you don't like a conversation you change the subject. If that keeps happening nothing gets resolved, nobody trusts anyone, people get decapitated. It's a shit show. Why was the hallway so empty? Nothing but a long expanse of linoleum stretching in either direction, no wraiths in the distance. Winnipeg felt a migraine building in the back of her skull, a pressurized note of pain that spread thin tendrils through her cortexes and lobes. What do you want me to say? That I trust you? That I like you? That I want to work with you? The most I shall say is that I abide you, and only barely. Your soul gem. Fargo pointed to the chain strung around Winnipeg's neck, from which her gem hung. The lavender hue had fluctuated to an unhealthy darkness. She had not used so much magic in the fight for it to look like that. Regina Saskatoon was quick to appear with a fistful of cubes, which she offered Winnipeg wordlessly. Winnipeg raised her hand to hit the cubes away, or hit Regina Saskatoon, or hit something, but instead she balled her fingers into a fist, sighed, and accepted the offering. If it makes you feel better, said Fargo, I'm only doing this because I need you to take down the Archon. If not for that, I wouldn't care what happened to you. That vouches for your ability. Conversation dwindled. As the trio covered the rest of the school and the grief drained from her gem bit by bit, Winnipeg wondered if maybe her ability had only ever been part of the problem, and that maybe Fargo's last attempt at reassurance had missed the mark entirely. Chapter 9, Behold the Scene Unseen. Fly on the wall. Those were her friend's exact words, fly on the wall. Become a fly. Become less than a fly. Become nothingness incarnate. It was easy. It hardly expended magic. It was a simple matter of emptying the eyes. Emptying the mind. Melding. Allowing a much more colorful and interesting world to swallow her completely. When she disappeared, all identity, all self erased. When Sloane Redfern had asked her name on the bus in Bismarck, she had hesitated only partially due to her timidity. The other part was she had trouble remembering. Omaha. Her name was Omaha. Her friend had told her. Thank you, friend. As soon as the Williston Three reconvened in the hotel room, Omaha slipped through the closing door and slid to her accustomed hiding place under the bed. She could hide anywhere, being invisible, but under the bed minimized the chance of someone bumping her on accident. A family of cute mice had made a den here. Their pink noses sniffed and sniffed, but they could not see what their snouts detected. Under the bed, Omaha could not see faces, but she could see feet. Sloane's big brown boots tromped back and forth along the perimeter of the room, turning with clockwork motions of her heels and the flitting of her coattail. Delaney Pollock's red Converse remained in one place, facing the bed as she leaned to inspect her map, the left foot tapping incessantly. Erica Dufresne stood near the window. An inquisitive mouse sniffed his way near Omaha's hand. She stretched out a finger and stroked his hunched back, only for him to scamper away as if haunted by the devil herself. Delaney Pollock began to speak and Omaha forced herself to listen.
To be perfectly honest, I never expected it to come to this.
Tap 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 went her foot.
I thought for sure the Archon would be in either the city hall or the school. I only put the airstrip on the list because I figured 3 candidate locations sounded better than 2. You're saying we should not check the airstrip,
said Erica Dufresne.
I'm figuring it now.
Tap tap tap.
If there's somewhere I missed, some large location the Archon would dwell. Where did the Saskatoon Archon hide?
Asked Sloane. Astute question. Predict future patterns based on past observations. Tap 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 went the foot.
As I may have mentioned before, I bungled the Saskatoon 2010 Archon hunt spectacularly. My companions and I camped outside the miasma and only entered on raiding expeditions. It took a long time to realize that every time we left the miasma, the Archon moved its location. We eventually tracked it down to a warehouse of no consequence, but it hid many places before that. How do we know our Archon isn't moving too?
Said Erica Dufresne.
It's too large. The ground would shake and its shadow would cover us all. Now in Fort McMurray 1985, the Edmonton girls reported immense distortion by the time they arrived. The Archon hid in what on the outside looked like a tiny shack, but on the inside was an immense palace. So all this is pointless, because the Archon could be anywhere. No, no, no.
Tap tap tap. Omaha resisted the urge to reach out and just hold down the tapping foot.
Fort McMurray 1985 was also a special case because infighting between the Edmonton and Calgary factions delayed the response to the Archon and allowed it to run ripshod over the spatial properties of its miasma. Again, totally unlike here, where we arrived before it could do much except expand the proportions.
Omaha's mousy friend returned, approaching with more caution. She placed a finger in his path so he would stumble upon her and be spared the surprise of a phantom suddenly scratching his back.
So what are you trying to say? Said Sloane.
Delaney Pollock's foot quit tapping.
I guess I'm saying I don't know. We can try the airstrip and hope it's there. If not, I'm not sure where next.
Mr. Mousy, with some trepidation, crawled onto Omaha's upturned palm. She clasped her hand and petted its swift-breathing little body.
Until we exhaust the original candidate locations there's no point discussing this, said Erica Dufresne. We search the airstrip. If the Archon is not there, we consider alternatives.
Delaney Pollock's foot resumed tapping. Why was it a red shoe? In folk tradition red was the color of Lucifer. Which would make sense as the underlying theme of Delaney Pollock's aesthetic, because she was sinful. Sinners were agents of Lucifer. Lucifer had committed the greatest sin of all. Luke 4:3 and 4:4, and the devil said unto him, If thou be the Son of God, command this stone that it be bread. And Jesus answered him, saying, It is written, that man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word of God. The old texts had mixed up the genders, but the point stood. Lucifer had enticed God to succumb to carnal desire, to satisfy herself in the physical world. But that world was inherently sinful. The place of God and God's true followers was in the spiritual realm, divorced from all corporeality and thus all sin. Polluk's conceit, that she could absolve her inherent wickedness by performing good deeds in fear rather than in feeling, would not save her. It was the same as Lucifer's temptation, a deception based on the physical world rather than spiritual eternality. How could Polluk's soul be taken to heaven, when it was her soul, not her body, that was tinted to its core? Omaha stroked Mr. Mousie's head.
That makes sense, said Polluk. The issue is, the airstrip is far from the inn. It'll be our longest trip yet. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything first. Is there a movie theater?
Said Sloane.
That's a big empty place. I don't see one.
Sloane quit pacing.
I dunno, a grain silo.
She went to the map.
It's just little squares.
They fell silent for a moment. Omaha released Mr. Mousie and let him scamper back to Mrs. Mousie and the Mousie Juniors. Maybe she had been too harsh on Polluk. There had to be something admirable in warring against one's nature in subservience to God. It wasn't Omaha's right to judge her, after all. God would decide whether Polluk could be forgiven her sins.
This posturing wastes time, said Defresne. If we have no alternative, we go to the airstrip. I hope it pans out,
said Polluk. The feet shuffled and migrated toward the exit. Carefully, quietly, Omaha extricated herself from under the bed and followed. The journey through the miasma to the north of Williston was long but uneventful. Omaha lingered behind and kept close to Sloane, but at no point did she have to surreptitiously strike down a wraith closing in on Sloane's back or rush ahead and slay an enemy the team might have difficulty dispatching. Nor did Polluk commit any more blunders to aggrieve Defresne. She kept her bubbles for Sloane's defense and allowed Defresne free rein over the wraith vanguard. Their communication was disjointed and sparse, but at least the three functioned adequately on their own, if not as a unit. Now that Sloane had salvaged herself from the dead zone, she moved quicker and fired faster and did not sap so much of Polluk's magic. This allowed Polluk to use her barriers to more creative purposes, like walling off alleyways to prevent whole hordes of wraiths from even entering the battle. Her friend had predicted after the initial rocky start they would reach an efficiency like this. And Omaha had doubted. The airstrip was no longer functional as an airstrip. The vast plain of tarmac had been and was still being devastated by an armada of jackhammers and backhoes, great mounds of gravel unearthed and stacked in vertiginous piles. Empty-eyed men wandered to and fro among the rubble, some carting trolleys of sand, some wielding digging tools. Wraiths mingled with them and fed from their quintessence. In the savaged ground lurched an infinite line of drills and pump jacks, drilling and pumping in perfect synchronization, filling the air with a cacophony of thrums and whirs. Immense demons loomed in the distance, presiding over the rape with steel pitchforks. Torrents of stone spewed in geysers, the atmosphere dense with ash and sulfur. Men collapsed in fits and tugged at their chests. A single glimmering hangar swallowed much of the eastern fringe of the airstrip. Its immense gate hung open, although inside was dark. Omaha knew nothing about archons, she forgot most of what Polluk yammered, but she supposed if anywhere the hangar was where one would be. Sloane stifled a cough.
This must be what everyone's come for.
She shielded her eyes and scanned the horizon.
Drills. I don't see anything that might be the Archon,
said Polluk.
The hangar,
said Defresne. They made for the hangar. Omaha drifted behind. The debris made it difficult to disguise her footsteps, so instead she matched her walk to Sloane's, whose heavy boots crunched to muffle Omaha's softer tread. The hangar was aglow with a cobalt shimmer, its domed roof an unbroken facade of corrugated steel like a cold idol in the name of some Mammon or Belphegor. A vague menace emanated from its gaping entrance. Omaha knew before they even entered that this had to be the temple of the Archon, felt her insides tighten in fear and revulsion. In her hands manifested the scythe, her weapon, although her friend had made crystal clear she was not to intercede unless the original trio were in a peril they could not escape themselves. But as she walked behind them, unseen and unknown, with her weapon in her hands and their weapons in theirs, she brimmed with solidarity, part of their team. A hero like them tasked to purge the unholy creatures. She wanted to whisper to Sloane some statement of union, something to include herself. If they could work with Polluk, surely they could work with her, surely she was not so vile as that. But she said nothing. A great fear gripped her, sparked not only by the echo of her friend's stern command to minimize interaction, but a fear that perhaps she was that vile. How could Sloane trust her? After she had bungled their first meeting, bit her like a beast. They were better off not knowing about her. Better off unaware of her existence. As soon as they passed the threshold, the interior of the hangar became illuminated in a grey haze made hazier by Omaha's bleary vision, which was bad normally and worse when invisible. Omaha tensed in anticipation of some false and prideful demon, but no such thing awaited inside. Instead, the entire hangar was filled with tents, most of white tarp but some in patchwork reds and blues. Tent after tent in neat lines and columns. An entire metropolis of tents, abuzz with dull activity as the oil men weaved between the aisles and murmured to each other in guttural tones. They sounded like the adults in the Charlie Brown cartoon, one of the 3 television shows the man who said he was her father had allowed her to watch.
No Archon here, either, said Defresny. Let's go.
Sloane stood at the entrance of the nearest tent and peered inside. Omaha peered inside as well. A stunted man sat on a threadbare quilt, his bony knees tucked under his chin. Arrayed before him were photographs of children. A wraith stood behind the man, its claws hooked into his neck like intravenous tubes.
Do they sleep here? Said Sloane. Looks like it, love, said Pollock. This must be a wraith smorgasbord. They don't attack us because they found something to munch already. The Archon is not here, said Defresny. Let's go.
Sloane stepped back and took in the high domed ceilings, the upper echelons of tin shrouded in shadow. Omaha stepped back and saw what she saw, tried to piece together her thought process, tried to understand her.
Poor insulation.
Sloane pulled her jacket tight around her.
We should go before we attract attention, said Pollock. If we fight here, it'll be hard to keep civilians safe from collateral. Winnipeg's right, this place is a bust.
Sloane followed her helpers out the hangar and Omaha followed Sloane. Like a guardian angel. Her friend had likened her job to that. To think, her, Omaha, an angel. Even this one offhand remark could fill her with hope. A tractor trundled past, dragging a caboose that overflowed with dust and minerals. As they waited for the path to clear, Pollock extracted the torn halves of her map. Sloane gathered clothes while Defresny did something else. Omaha approached as near as she dared.
There's nothing, said Pollock. No other place. The cemetery? Maybe. Even the cemetery is tiny, said Sloane. We could have missed a room in the city hall. A secret passage. I dunno.
A nearby drill plunged into the earth with a raucous peal that settled into a consistent buzz. Sloane covered her ears and shouted.
Is there a supermarket? What? Supermarket?
The drill died down.
No, said Pollock. Not that I can see. It doesn't help this map is 15 years old. I told you it was worthless, said Defresny.
Pollock hung her head and crushed the map in her fists.
It doesn't make sense. Stupid. Map.
With one girly fling after another, she launched the 2 halves into the air. They caught in the stagnant air and flitted down as soon as they left her hands, and before they touched the ground she gave a shriek of dismay and caught them. As Pollock smoothed the map over her knee, Sloane turned away and again chewed the scenery. Omaha gravitated to her, tried to see what she was seeing, but all she seemed to look at was the giant drill that had stirred such a ruckus. Beyond it many more drills heaved up and down like sledgehammers, until at long last they dwindled into darkness. What makes you so pensive, Sloane? Is it your predicament? Your soul gem, your uneasy relationships with your helpers? What the Archon looks like, its keep? What you will do when you find it, what tactics you will employ? Or perhaps you stare onward, across the plains of North Dakota to that last city on the fringe of ice, Minneapolis, where a certain someone awaits with her piano and her dulcimer and all the other instruments of her dominion. If only Omaha could ask her, speak with her. If only she had not squandered the previous moments she already had.
Underground, said Sloane.
Neither Pollock nor Defresny heard at first. Perhaps she did not wish to be heard, but Omaha had somehow wandered so close the bare whisper, sedated even before the nullifying effects of the miasma, bloomed like an incantation in her ears. Underground.
Underground, said Sloane.
Louder. Pollock cocked her head.
What's that, love? The fucking oil.
Sloane's eyes remained fixed on the expanding rows of drills.
That's the whole reason they're here, the fucking oil. Underground. The drills, the goddamn worm thing, the goddamn crawfish thing. Tunnels and pits everywhere. It all goes underground.
Pollock looked at the ground between her ruby red heels. Even in costume her shoes were red.
You mean? The Archon is underground. Even if we believe that,
said Dufresne,
underground is a big place. Underground where? Here? Somewhere else?
Sloane snatched Pollock's map and ran her finger over it, leaning in close as both of her helpers leaned in over her shoulders. She scanned the rows of small square structures and straight arterial streets. Finally her finger settled on something.
Here.
With the others crowding the view, Omaha had to get creative to see what Sloane meant. She looped around to the other side and contorted herself to view the map upside down, careful not to accidentally nudge anyone or breathe in the wrong direction. The structure Sloane prodded with her finger had no name and typeface either large or small. Instead, it had a tiny round emblem. Omaha pushed her glasses close to see what was inside the crest, which was drawn with the schematic iconography of a caution sign. All she could make out was a black funnel of some sort, with lines around it to indicate motion. After an unresponsive moment from her helpers, Sloane elucidated.
Tornado shelter.
A lonely alley twisted up to the tornado shelter, nestled between much grander and more imposing structures. From above ground it was nothing but yet another uninspired and distinctly practical construction, flat and short and geometric, dilapidated and decayed. A perfect emblem of the town itself, a thing meant for mere survival and nothing else. Its plain outward appearance belied its rugged hardiness. No doubt this amorphous structure had stood for many years. No doubt it would stand many more. The thought filled Sloane with hope. The Archon had to be here. The more she thought it over, the more it made sense. The bland facade, the curious lack of wraiths nearby, the winding network of back alleys they had navigated to reach it. It all pointed to a hidden lair. If she were right, it would give her leverage to bargain up her grief cube cut with Winnipeg, undeniable proof of her contribution to the task. Not only that, but it would be a victory rare for Sloane, a victory of wits over brute strength. She could not help but think she would need such victories to overcome Claire Ibsen, who for the first time in a long time no longer felt like an abstract concept, a carrot on a stick, but a tangible entity. The entire way up the alley, Sloane's thoughts had probed Claire's battle strengths and weaknesses, her various powers and her innovative ways of using them. She actually had to reprimand herself to keep focused on the Archon. Something about chickens and hatching. They stopped in front of the squat building. Winnipeg folded her arms and regarded three plaid-shirted men clustered around a burning metal barrel, their woolen gloves held over the flame.
This looks unpromising. That's the point, said Sloane. Hiding places shouldn't be obvious. We're here, so there's no reason not to check it out, said Delaney. I for one think it's an excellent hypothesis, love.
Amazing what a few words of flattery could do when you actually believed them. Amazing how you realize just how miserable you were when the first traces of happiness return. She was going to make it out. She was going to go to Minneapolis. All that bullshit with Delaney and Winnipeg meant nothing because soon none of them would have to see each other again. And Omaha. Ah, shit. She had forgotten Omaha. Whatever, if the three of them could take an Archon, they could take her. Poor girl, manipulated to be Cube's tool. Who knew what bogus philosophy he had crammed down her throat, hilarious if not so pathetic. No matter, they would defeat Omaha. Sloane, being magnanimous in victory, would let the poor girl live. For the first time in a long time Sloane felt like the good guy again.
Sloane love? You all right?
Sloane blinked. Delaney and Winnipeg stared at her.
Sorry. Zoned out. Don't do that,
said Winnipeg. Although the rebuke sounded less harsh than usual. Or maybe that was another byproduct of the eagerness and anticipation bristling inside Sloane.
Well, what are we waiting for?
She hefted her gun and tried the door to the shelter. It opened with a rusty creak and a puff of reddish flakes. Inside an elaborate mural of shadows danced across triangular walls. Cobwebs and dust presided over a narrow room of vague purpose. Furniture draped in ghostly sheets bulged in awkward directions. A morose silence filled the space. Although the space was not silent, some sort of heating unit reverberated with a ubiquitous ohm that gave the room a sacred character despite its unassuming contents. Sloane knew this had to be the place.
Find a staircase or a ladder or something. Anything that goes down.
Winnipeg studied an object draped in a sheet and with one brush of her arm disrobed it, revealing it as a perfectly normal table. She dropped the sheet and brushed dust from her hands.
This is pointless. There's nothing here. You're simply sour, you didn't think of it yourself.
Delaney crouched low and tapped the floorboards with her staff. With a blast of wind, Winnipeg blew the rest of the sheets against the wall. A cloud of dirt filled the room and Sloane buried her mouth and nose within the collar of her jacket.
I would not care about something so petty,
Winnipeg said unconvincingly. On one of the uncovered tables, Sloane found a thick ledger bound in colorless leather. A single word adorned the cover in embossed gold, Doomsday. She brushed off the dust and opened the book. Inside was a list of names and dates. The months were in German, although Sloane could read them because they were basically the same as English except with more K's and Z's. Her finger traced down the page. Every name was female, spanning a diverse array of nationalities and cultures. She flipped through the pages and settled on the R names. Sure enough, her own name was in the ledger. Redfern, Sloane. The date, May 11, 2009. The day she had contracted. What was something like this doing here? She remembered the German records in the city hall and realized how little she had thought about the transmutations of a miasma.
Found it,
said Delaney. She stamped her ruby slipper against a rickety trapdoor. Sloane shut the book and inspected the hatch. It was fastened by a thick padlock that crumbled to ash the moment she touched it. The hatch fell inward with a pained screech of its hinges, revealing rungs into an empty abyss. Something below murmured.
Who goes first?
Said Sloane. Without a word, Winnipeg dove into the air, somersaulted, and plummeted through the hole. Sloane scrambled after her, swinging onto the rungs. The moment she placed her weight against them they gave in unison, dissolving like the padlock. She groped for Delaney's outstretched hand and swiped nothing but air as the small square of light above grew smaller and smaller, Delaney minimizing into oblivion. She fell a long time, long enough to worry how and where she would land before she landed on an updraft of air about a foot from the ground. Beside her stood Winnipeg, directing the wind with a finger.
You idiot,
said Winnipeg as she dispersed the air and dropped Sloane to the floor.
It was obvious the rungs would break. Why do you think I jumped? Thanks for the warning,
said Sloane.
And thanks for catching me.
Yeah, said Winnipeg. In the dim light, only the faint contours of her face were visible.
I hope you're right. I hope the Archon is here. I want to kill it and depart as swiftly as possible.
Sloane realized now might be her last chance to warn Winnipeg about Omaha. If Omaha had jumped after them, they would have heard her land. Right? She decided to chance it.
Winnipeg, I need to tell you something. About Regina, Saskatoon. No. There's a
red glow enveloped them as Delaney descended atop a glimmering bubble.
Hello, dears. Glad to see you both made it safely. Any sign of our foe?
There was no sign of anything in the darkness. As Delaney's bubble popped, Sloane held up a hand and exuded a small orb of light. Nothing was illuminated except her companions. The thought struck her that Omaha might cast a shadow despite her invisibility, but no phantoms stretched across the ground into the infiniteness of the cavern around them. She realized she had very little conception of how Omaha's power worked. The murmur sounded again. It encircled them in the dark, an odd high-pitched voice uttering incomprehensible sounds dampened by the miasma. It was neither human nor inhuman, straddling a chasm within which some demon dwelled. The sound echoed into a sinister giggle.
The Archon,
said Sloane.
Or another minion,
said Winnipeg. At the periphery of darkness something long and slender writhed. Winnipeg dashed forward and slashed her katana at the twitching limb. The blade sunk halfway with a wet slurp. Sloane illuminated the wriggling thing, from which a white pus oozed where Winnipeg had sliced it. It took Sloane a few moments to compartmentalize what she was seeing, a massive tubular root, girded with immense thorns. After a few unsuccessful attempts, Winnipeg placed her foot onto the root and tore her sword away. The root only continued to writhe, neither rearing to attack nor retreating into darkness. Winnipeg touched the white juice dripping from her blade with the tip of her finger. She smelled it.
What's this belong to?
Said Sloane. Delaney extended her staff and pointed the way the root led, deeper into the dark.
Let's find out.
They followed alongside the twisting and widening tuber as it led down a space with no walls and no ceiling and no distinguishing features at all save the gravelly turf of the ground beneath them. The squealing, almost feminine murmur continued, as if the hidden voice were engaged in conversation with a deity that could not be sensed. The root lured them deeper and deeper. Sloane tread carefully, ready to blast anything that surfaced from the void. At some point they entered a tunnel, or they had been in a tunnel the whole time, only the dimensions narrowed enough to be seen. The route continued into the cavern, although the walls grew smaller and smaller around it, until the three of them were forced to crouch to continue.
"This may very well be it," said
Delaney. She lacked her usual pep. Sloane angled her body to avoid one of the jutting thorns. She shuffled against the root to scrape by. Something pulsed within it like a thick, throbbing vein.
"The Archon you fought in Saskatoon. What did it do?" "It took the form of a 1,000-limbed giant," said Delaney. "It lifted enormous piles of earth and hurled them at us. It crushed girls between its fingers. I don't think this Archon is anything like that."
They said little else. The mouth of the cavern had contorted to a gasping space, most of which was filled by the root. They slithered across it, avoiding the thorns as well they could. Sloane's overcoat snagged more than once, leaving jagged gashes in the tail. The murmur grew in volume and intensity in the confines of the tunnel. When the space had tightened to the point where Sloane thought she might have to shed her coat to continue, Winnipeg stopped.
"I see the end." "What's there?"
Delaney tried to peer over Winnipeg's shoulder but bumped her head on the ceiling.
"Light,"
said Winnipeg. She continued her crawl. Sloane crushed herself against the root to slide forward. Sand and rock scratched against her from all sides and forced her to spit an ashen taste from her mouth. The throbbing root filled her with an obscure dread, as though it were draining her somehow by its mere touch. Ahead Delaney and Winnipeg reached the mouth of the cavern, which widened enough for them to stand and peer side by side into something below. Sloane wiggled forward, kicking at the walls for leverage. The root exuded an unctuous sap that caught in her hair and stuck to her face. She wondered if Omaha were behind her, propelling herself forward with the same amount of difficulty. Probably she had no trouble navigating the space, as slight as she was.
"Not stuck, are you, love? You'll want to see this."
With a grunt, Sloane slid herself forward and forced herself into the mouth of the cavern. She wiped off ooze and dirt, only succeeding in gumming up her fingers before she gave up. She went to where Delaney and Winnipeg stood and peered between their heads. Sloane knew what she saw even before Delaney said,
"That's the Archon."
Chapter 10, The Lord God Prepared a Gourd. The vast and eroded walls of the Archon's den curved inward and met in a dome engulfed in shadow, although a vague grey aura illuminated the rest of the astronomical absence. Mouths of caverns like the one in which they stood dotted the bulging center of the den, and into each trailed a pulsing, thorny root. The roots clung to the lower walls and coalesced at the base of the immense ovular room. They widened to the thickness of tree trunks until they disappeared beneath the heaving, bulbous bottom of the Archon. The Archon was a giant flower bud. That was the best way Sloane could conceive it. At the base, its dappled and slimy epidermis swelled into a rotund, almost perfectly spherical bulge that gently heaved as if breathing, attuned to the ripples that surged through its roots into its body. The bulb tapered into a conical protrusion about halfway up the extent of its confines. At the tip, the epidermis contracted into a wrinkled nub, out of which a small black flower with 3 petals swayed in an imaginary breeze. At the bottom of the room, a puddle of the Archon's inky runoff ebbed slowly back and forth. Roots weaved in and out of the brackish pool.
"You're sure that's it? That's the Archon?"
said Sloane. Her voice came out as a whisper, although she had not intended it.
"Oh yes, love," said
Delaney.
"Look."
She pointed her arm, frail and white against the overwhelming blackness below, at the great black drops of dew that formed on and rolled off the leathery skin of the bud. As each drop struck the pool and burst, a wraith emerged as if from a cocoon before plunging beneath with only a small ripple.
"It's creating wraiths," Delaney continued. "Only the Archon can do that. They must use these tunnels to spread throughout the town. With all these roots, it can perceive everything in its domain. It can probably feel the palpitations of your heartbeat right now."
Sloane shuffled further away from the writhing root that extended from their cavern.
"It has no discernible weak point."
Winnipeg crouched low as she surveyed the immense and unbroken form of the thing's vegetable flesh.
"No doubt that hide is too tough for normal weapons to pierce." "What about the roots?" said Sloane.
Winnipeg stroked her chin.
"If we severed them all, perhaps. There must be hundreds." "The flower on top,"
said Delaney. All of them were whispering. This thing, this Archon emanated a daunting presence, not sheerly from its immensity but from something else, something extrasensory, not quite a smell or taste or feeling but nonetheless something Sloane could perceive. Bad mojo. She had never put much thought to the wraiths as much more than an adversary for her to kill, but the full rush of the realization of their true nature struck her now. The word evil for the first time meant something to Sloane as she gazed upon the Archon. For so long it had been only the antonym of good, something from fables and fairy tales, the cheap gimmick employed by a writer too afraid to delve into the complex realities of the human psyche. In the face of this evil thing, complexities dissolved, nuance and subtlety vanished, all fell into the oblivion of its darkness. Words, thoughts, and reason were devoured and replaced only by a hollow emptiness, a lack of life and hope. Sloane felt very much like she wanted to die.
The flower.
Winnipeg's words came out slow, distorted.
Is probably a trap.
Sloane rubbed her eyes. Blinked. Her head rang with the murmur of the Archon, with the elongated words uttered by her companions. She sagged against the wall as a wave of nausea swept over her. Her body felt like an empty husk, like skin draped over bones and blood, a feeling exacerbated by the realization that it was exactly that, a husk, soulless and empty. Like chattel. Like compost. Decaying and rotting in the ground, fed upon by worms and termites. This had to be some kind of psychological attack. Something propagated by the Archon. She knew it, but the feeling consumed her. Delaney and Winnipeg continued to speak without noticing. They didn't care about her. Nobody cared about her. Not her family, not the only person she could have ever called a friend. Memories surfaced in her mind unbidden like images on a projector screen. She tried to blot them out, tell herself it was the Archon's doing, but they would not be ignored. Images of her alone. Alone at home. Alone at school. Alone in the neighborhood as she scratched sticks in the dirt. So many images. The setting shifted from Scottsdale, Arizona to Eden Prairie, Minnesota. Sloane grabbed her skull and tried not to think, tried to shut down, tried to die, but she could not. She unspooled from the reality of the cavern mouth. The images played as though she had returned to that time and place in Minnesota Middle School where she skulked across campus stewing in resentment of her blind twin sister and all her friends and all her popularity, wondering why her defect made her so much more desirable than Sloane herself as she searched for a place to sit and eat her bag lunch, but every bench and table was occupied by cliques of happy friends, as if they were absorbing Sloane's happiness for their own nourishment, because every time she turned and saw another smiling face she grew emptier and emptier inside, until she found a bench with a single quiet girl who stared down a sandwich with pensive curiosity, as though this sandwich were the single most engrossing thing in the world, and Sloane thought maybe if she kept quiet and ate quickly this other girl wouldn't even notice her, because the sandwich must be infinitely more interesting. But no sooner had she unraveled her own lunch had the other girl looked up and extended a cordial hand and said, "Hello.
I'm Claire Ibsen. What's your name?"
And Sloane had stared back shocked for a moment and muttered a response, except that wasn't what Sloane did now. What Sloane did now was throw herself across the table and wrap her hands around Claire's throat and throttle her pretty white neck, intending to squeeze until her fucking head popped off and rolled across the quad so all the happy people and their happy fucking lives could see the true horror of their world. Claire's eyes bulged and she fell back and Sloane fell atop her and slammed her head against the ground, channeling all of her strength into her grip, kneading the soft flesh of the throat like putty. A blade ripped into her back and through her chest and into Claire Ibsen's chest and out her back. Eden Prairie Preparatory School shattered into 1,000 shards to reveal the world of the miasma and the compacted walls of the cavern. Claire Ibsen disappeared, replaced by Delaney Pollock. Delaney's face was an almost comical shade of violet, her mouth agape in a twisted half-grin. Winnipeg retracted her blade from both of them and voided it of blood with one quick wipe.
"Are you done being crazy yet?"
Sloane's eyes sagged as her blood dripped down and splattered Delaney's white dress. She relinquished her grasp and rolled over against the Archon's root, struggling to breathe as her lungs heaved worthlessly in her chest cavity. It took only a moment for Delaney to jump up and heal them both with an operatic wave of her arm. The purple drained from her face, replaced by her typical rosy luster.
"Pretty weird, love. Hope that was a one-time thing."
The root breathed beneath Sloane. She peeled herself off and stood abruptly, growing dizzy as her brain and senses calibrated. She rubbed the back of her skull and regained her balance. "Fuck."
"Careful, don't fall over the edge."
Delaney steadied her.
"Were you hallucinating or what?" "Something like that,"
said Sloane. Everything felt topsy-turvy.
"I thought you were Claire Ibsen. The girl from Minneapolis? The one you hate?"
Sloane nodded.
The Archon must have your leg.
Winnipeg brushed aside the tail of Sloane's coat with her blade. Sloane drew back shamefaced as her companions ogled her nearly bare, and poorly shaved, legs. Only after several seconds of prolonged staring could she muster the will to look down herself. A shallow red line ran along her lower left leg, no broader than a pen stroke. Even after she saw it she could not feel it. Delaney snapped her fingers and healed the scratch as fast as she had healed the stab wound.
Remember where you got that, love? I'd wager one of these thorns nicked you as you squeezed by.
That sounded right. She certainly hadn't taken the utmost care when she slithered through the narrow aperture on her belly.
So the thorns are toxic after all, said Winnipeg. Significant intel. Good that we learned this now, before the fight began. Glad to be the guinea pig.
Sloane pulled the tails of her coat back together to conceal her legs. She hoped her embarrassment wasn't too obvious, but of course Delaney gave her a knowing look with what might have been a wink as she tapped her lower lip. At least Winnipeg could be counted on to not give a shit. She made an abrupt turn back toward the Archon. Its bulb-like body had made no movement or change, black beads rolled off it endlessly into the pool below.
Now the matter of how to fight this thing.
Miffed by the preceding events, Sloane elbowed a space for herself between Delaney and Winnipeg and ushered them aside as she materialized her gun.
I say we shoot it. A few seconds of sustained fire and it won't matter how thick the hide is.
Her companions shifted behind her in the narrow space, both taking especial care to keep away from the thorny root throbbing beside them. Neither objected to Sloane's plan, so she revved up the barrel, waiting for it to reach full spin before unleashing a focused and steady stream of light at the Archon. She struck at the most corpulent part of the bulb, where the epidermis stretched wide and, she hoped, thin. Not that she knew jack-dick about plant anatomy. Not that a magical demon formed of pure despair had to conform to actual plant anatomy anyway. The light hit the skin with no splash, as though it had bored a hole straight through on first contact. Or maybe the fleshy plant was absorbing the light the moment it touched, slurping it into the infinite darkness of its miasma. The irony of fighting with light was that things got so bright it was difficult to see exactly what was happening. Usually Sloane assumed when something disappeared beneath a deluge of her magic it meant the thing no longer existed, but as she fired for 5, 10, 15 seconds with no change in the Archon whatsoever, either in demeanor or the gleeful murmur that burrowed into her earbuds, she began to doubt. After 20 seconds she shut off her magic before she taxed herself too heavily. Not a single mark where she had hit.
As I expected,
said Winnipeg.
I recall saying exactly that. I doubt normal weapons will harm it. Yeah, whatever. It doesn't even care about us, said Delaney. She folded her arms and chewed her lip. We're so insignificant compared to it, it doesn't even bother to react.
It baffled Sloane. Never had she encountered a wraith that simply ignored her. Basically her only strategy ever was to shoot something a lot. Sometimes things moved fast or had some weird power to make things tricky, but then she just had to find a creative way to shoot it. The shooting itself had never failed to suffice. She glanced over the bulb in search of a weak point. Her eyes settled on the tiny black flower that sprouted from the topmost tip of the bulb. Aha! Perfect weak point. Winnipeg began to say something but Sloane cut her off by raising her gun again and sending one swift beam at the flower, incinerating it instantly. The bulb made no change. The beads rolled off, the roots throbbed. After a few seconds, an identical flower sprouted from the tip and swayed back and forth in the non-existent wind. Sloane tossed her hands and turned away.
Thank you for that pointless interlude, said Winnipeg. As I intended to say, we should next attempt to destroy the roots. All of them,
said Sloane.
If it refuses to launch a counterattack, I do not see why not.
Delaney shrugged.
Might as well.
They stepped aside to give Winnipeg room as she pressed one foot against the quivering root next to them and touched her blade to the thinnest spot in the vicinity. She drew back her sword and swung it hard on the root, sinking in halfway with the first slice. With a vicious tug she pulled the sword out and swung again, severing the root. Noxious white pus oozed out. Winnipeg dried her blade on the dirt and sheathed it. All three of them looked from the root to the bulb in anticipation. Nothing happened. The pus quickly hardened into a sealant and soldered the severed ends of the root back together. The root continued to throb happily. Sloane jabbed fingers into the corners of her eyes. Winnipeg prodded the sealant with her sword. Delaney found a safe part of the root and sat down.
Well,
said Winnipeg. She strained for something more profound with a series of false starts. Eventually, she turned away from the root with a huff.
It's too cramped to think.
Without warning, she stepped from the mouth of the tunnel and plunged into the vast subterranean chamber of the Archon. She skated the festooned route down to the lagoon below and evaded the thorns with almost imperceptible maneuvers of her feet. When she reached the bottom, she pushed off and landed atop a gnarled bramble nearby. A few wraiths ascended from the mire, painted black by the liquid, but Winnipeg decapitated them with a single whirlwind strike of her sword, which she performed as though by rote as she surveyed the surroundings from the new vantage. Sloane considered joining her, since she had nothing better to do, but Delaney said,
"What exactly did you see?" "What?" "When you were strangling me. You mentioned your friend in Minneapolis. What was the exact nature of the hallucination, love? Had I simply been replaced by Claire Ibsen's visage, or was it something else like a dream, perhaps?"
She leaned close to observe a thorn, her face inches from the tip.
"No, I saw memories. A lot of them, they spanned my whole life. When I got to one with Claire, I snapped."
Delaney's interest expanded. She climbed off the root and kneeled beside it to conduct a more thorough examination of the thorn. Her head turned every so often to compare it to the next thorn over.
"But there's no guarantee the effects of the toxin have to manifest in violence. You simply encountered something you were naturally predisposed to hate."
Sloane disliked this.
"Whatever it is, it's obviously no good, so don't touch it." "I know, love."
Delaney sighed and stood up. She brushed dirt from her dress.
"I would never jeopardize our mission over something so silly. But I am curious, you know. Memory is something that appeals to me greatly. As it must appeal to most who harbor great regrets." "You mean the girl you killed in Saskatoon?"
Delaney flinched.
"Claudia, yes. What I did back then, I did specifically because I believed nothing I did could matter. That nothing mattered. My actions were the offspring of the severe nihilism my inability to feel had created inside me. It wasn't that I hated Claudia. It wasn't that she made me angry, that if I saw her I would fly into a murderous rage and strangle her. She mildly annoyed me, her and her little dog. And since I, as a newfound magical girl, had suddenly fallen into a position where law and society no longer constrained me, mild annoyance meant cause for murder. Because nothing mattered, nothing governed the universe. Do you understand?" "I understand that's totally psychotic."
At first, Delaney seemed about to protest, but her shoulders slumped.
Yes. Yes, it is. But that's the point. Because God or something exacted divine retribution upon my wrong in the form of that first Archon, 3 years ago. Now I think, if I just went back to that moment where I had Claudia and her dog at my mercy, how easy it would be to simply not kill her. How easy. Because I had no rage, no emotion. No passion. No frenzy. I had mild annoyance. Just as I have mild annoyance at Winnipeg, just as I no offense occasionally have mild annoyance at you, love. And since I now know something does govern me, does create meaning in this universe, I now have no desire to act on that minor emotion of annoyance. No, emotion is the wrong word, let's see. How about discomfort? Anyway, where was I?"
Sloane folded her arms.
"Rambling." Right. So I think, how easy it would be to go back and simply not kill Claudia. The pointlessness is exactly what made it so sinful. I understand that now. But at the same time, killing her was what made me understand that. Without a powerful enough sin to turn the eye of God upon me, I could never understand that what I was doing was wrong. Which means, in a way, killing Claudia was a good thing. A necessary thing? That made me a better person, in the end."
She turned to Sloane as if expecting affirmation. Sloane had zoned out for most of it, the logic so tenuous she had difficulty following.
"Delaney. God didn't punish you for killing Claudia. Archons just spawn in these boondocks from time to time. I'm glad you regret murdering some innocent girl. Great, awesome. Keep up the not murdering, Delaney. But this babble doesn't cut a case for your sanity."
Delaney's brow furrowed. Probably experiencing some of her favorite discomfort, mild annoyance.
"Don't you even think, Sloane love? No. You feel. You see someone you hate and throttle them. You're exactly like I was. Except you can feel stronger emotions and thus need stronger emotions to act. If we slay the Archon, do you truly intend to kill Claire Ibsen?" "Yes."
The murmur of the Archon peaked in pitch for a moment and returned to normal. Delaney sighed. She tapped her foot against the thick encasement of pus. The root had bled when Winnipeg severed it.
Please, Sloane. Think about what you're doing, okay? If we win here, you'll be healthy, you'll be strong. Why squander that on an act of destruction? She took my city. She betrayed me.
Sloane tried not to grow angry. It didn't work. This was the bullshit that always happened. First with her twin sister, then with Claire. Where they could get away with all sorts of things, awful things, but because Sloane's sister had been blind and Claire had been pretty and sociable, nobody batted an eye. But when Sloane tried anything, anything at all, it was fire and brimstone, hail and plague. She turned toward the mouth of the tunnel to signify the conversation was over. Because it was. Claire Ibsen had taken everything from Sloane short of her life. Retribution was justified, the way the killing of a girl Cube slated for termination was justified. As if Delaney had any right to speak. After what she did. Oh, but wait, now she was Miss Moral Exemplar, who thought about things, so obviously she knew the truth, and who also regretted all the bad things she did except maybe they were a good thing after all? Fuck you, Delaney. Sloane would rather join Winnipeg in whatever foolery down below. But Delaney flung out a hand and caught Sloane by the shoulder.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to trounce your feelings, love.
She tugged Sloane's shoulder to turn her around, but Sloane remained fixed at the cavern mouth. Winnipeg had vanished from view, probably on the other side of the Archon.
You have every right to hate her. Every right. Cube told me all about what happened to you. She stabbed you in the back, beat you to a pulp, forced you from your own home. None of that is okay. But hatred begets hatred. It creates a cycle, an endless loop. A snake biting its own tail. If you kill Claire Ibsen, will you be happy?
No, said Sloane.
I'll be vindicated. That's enough. Archons are powerful beings, said Delaney. Odds are high we won't all make it out of the upcoming battle alive. Not to be dour about it, of course. It's mere probability. Cube told me as much. I have a simple request of you. Would you like to hear it? You're going to tell me anyway. If I die, and you survive, could you forget Claire Ibsen and go to Saskatchewan and take over my cities? They're not Minneapolis, but combined they're enough for a magical girl to live happily. You wouldn't have to dwell in misery, and you wouldn't have to destroy yourself for vengeance.
Delaney's hand curled into Sloane's shoulder, the fingers white and lithe. Sloane could feel the chill of her touch through the jacket.
Why the hell would I do that, she said. Because it's my dying wish. You have to honor a dying wish. You're not dying. You can heal your own severed head, how are you even supposed to die?
The hand dug tighter.
Ugh. You're missing the point entirely.
Winnipeg's telepathic voice interrupted her. You two. Get down here. I found something. Sloane brushed off Delaney's hand.
I'm going down.
Delaney allowed her hand to fall and made no reply. Sloane surveyed the network of routes leading to the lagoon and plotted a path for herself before leaping from the ledge and following it. She hit a root at an angle, bounced off, and landed on the same bramble Winnipeg had used earlier. A chill wafted from the black liquid, an aura of negative heat. Her body temperature plummeted instantaneously and wrapping her jacket tighter did nothing. Thick plumes of white air billowed from her mouth as she realized she had experienced no overwhelming coldness like this during her stint in Williston, the kind of coldness to which she was accustomed in Fargo. Except this coldness extended beyond what was accustomed, it seemed a coldness capable of debilitating a normal human. Her insides felt frost-coated, her ribs like icicles. Despite the pain, the cold imbued her with mental clarity and sharpness. Cold was her natural element, after all. Sloane glanced over her shoulder, but Delaney remained in the mouth of the cavern. She lifted a toothpick-sized arm and waved. The primordial expanse of fluid and foliage, all primitive shades of black and overgrowth green, made hunting for Winnipeg difficult. Most of the things that moved were either throbbing roots or spectral wraiths that drifted through the swampland. The fleshy vegetable mass of the Archon heaved and shook. From below it took the appearance of a celestial body, its bottom perfectly rounded, like a moon drawn too close to the orbit of the planet and now threatening to crash. Roots flowed from its lower parts like a mass of cables, each pulsing with chunks of lifeblood, siphoning energy from the tunnels back to this bulb, this planet. The bulb was not submerged in the lagoon. Although it perspired black globules in a constant torrent, the room did not seem to fill. A small space beneath the bulb was navigable, and deep beneath it Sloane saw Winnipeg, perched on a low root and poking her sword at something in the mire. With a series of cautious jumps, Sloane approached Winnipeg, all the while trying to discern the thing floating in the swamp. It was about the size of a log, but the blackness of the liquid around it made it impossible to see anything more. Even when Sloane managed to climb onto Winnipeg's root, she still had trouble piecing together the amalgam of organic bits that composed the thing. Winnipeg was trying to reel it in with the tip of her katana, but it kept sliding and rotating in the muck.
"What is it?"
said Sloane.
"A girl,"
said Winnipeg. The moment she said it, the pieces came together in Sloane's mind and she could make out the mudded and mutilated corpse for what it was. Details such as age could only be guessed at, but it was a slight, shriveled body, swaddled in the remains of an oversized sweater perforated with ragged holes. About half the girl's face had been gnawed off, exposing a bare eyeball in a clotted socket, and the mouth hung open in a perpetual cry of horror. Winnipeg finally fished the body and dragged it onto the root. The murmur of the Archon had risen in intensity, surrounding them in a manic chuckle. The bulb bulged and throbbed above them.
"Think the rat sent someone before us?"
said Winnipeg.
"Why just one girl?"
said Sloane.
"Perhaps there are more."
Winnipeg scanned the surrounding area. No other bodies anywhere on the placid surface.
"Where would they even come from? We're the closest cities of any size. He'd have brought in girls from even farther away, or nomads. Perhaps the rat did not send her. Perhaps she came of her own volition, seeking cubes. And died for her troubles."
It seemed impossible. A lone girl, a lone nomad no less, a girl too weak to hold territory even in this barren edge of the world, could have made it this far. Besides, Delaney had mentioned the Archon hadn't been around long, which was why the miasma was only a partial distortion of the real world, although if what she had seen were only partial, Sloane wondered what true distortion meant. Unless the girl had been here concurrent to them. A thought popped in her head and she scrutinized the corpse more closely, trying to make out a distinct appearance through the tar and eviscerated flesh. But soon she decided the girl was not Asian, and thus could not be Omaha. It didn't make sense why Omaha would rush down here and die anyway. Probably she stood a few feet away from Sloane, watching the corpse just as they did.
"This body has begun to decompose," said Winnipeg. "I am no coroner, but I would say several days of putrefaction. That would mean it's been here since the miasma started, or even before,"
said Sloane. Winnipeg wiped her hands on the sides of her skirt.
"Interesting. Did the rat inform you what causes an Archon to manifest?" A lot of sin and despair. I kind of figured it had something to do with the oil drills." "As did I,"
said Winnipeg.
"Do you know why an Archon appeared in Saskatoon 3 years ago?"
Unable to stomach any more the sight of the decayed corpse, Sloane turned away.
"I heard Delaney babble about divine retribution and God and shit. So that is how she frames it,"
said Winnipeg. She clasped her hands under her chin.
"I see. That is how she creates meaning in her life. One of the oldest forms of doing so in human history."
"Hey. Religion," said Winnipeg.
"Faith in something greater. I assume you are not a religious person, Fargo. Neither am I. Neither are most Puella Magi."
Sloane got the feeling she was getting roped into another uncomfortable philosophical conversation. While on the one hand she wanted to not do that, to in fact do the opposite of that and not speak to either Delaney or Winnipeg and just find some way to kill the Dem Archon and part ways, she couldn't muster the same vitriol toward Winnipeg. Both her and Delaney had opened to Sloane lately, and of the two Winnipeg felt more genuine, more honestly conflicted, most of all because Sloane wasn't even sure what exactly Winnipeg's conflict was, and maybe neither did she. At the same time, the constant seething of the bulb above them made Sloane uneasy.
"Let's get out of here,"
she suggested. The murmur had grown to a frenetic intensity, a pounding cackle she tried to blot out by clapping her hands to her ears. But the sound refused to abate even an iota, and she realized it was not a real sound, it was a sound in her mind, as though the Archon were trying to speak to her with telepathy. She wondered if only she could hear it, or if Winnipeg and Delaney simply refused to acknowledge it. Winnipeg remained by the side of the corpse, inspecting it. The brackish mire around them began to ripple and the roots writhed and twisted. The immense body of the Archon emitted a vast rumble. Sloane backed away, but the roots she had used to get so far beneath the Archon were no longer there. The root on which they stood started to sink.
"Let's go,"
said Sloane. Winnipeg stood up and wiped her hands again. A disinterested, almost spacey look had crept over her features.
"Oh. So it has finally decided to attack, has it?"
The root had almost completely submerged in the mire. The thick, elastic liquid sucked at Sloane's boot soles. She searched for another root to leap to, but the black expanse of the lagoon was total. Almost every root had disappeared across the entire surface. The tar rose to her ankles. She tried to lift one leg, but she had to exert considerable force to break from the adhesive. Around them burst thousands of gnarled, thorny roots, erupting from the lake in an indistinguishable mass of sickly green and splatters of tar. The roots surrounded them on all sides, coiling in close to entrap them. By the time Sloane had become cognizant of the situation, Winnipeg had already launched herself through the briars and disappeared in a flurry of sword strokes and windswept squalls. Sloane attempted to jump, but she had no footing and no momentum, and the tar had crept halfway to her knees. So instead, she fell flat on her face, hitting the tensile surface with an audible smack. Had she not grown enough over the course of this stupid expedition to stop fucking up like this? She struggled not to swallow any of the acrid fluid. The scent of decomposition swelled in her nostrils. A hand grabbed her collar and yanked her up.
"Come on,"
said Omaha's voice.
"You need to jump."
A root swung at her like a spike-tipped flail. Sloane jumped, bounced atop it, and sprung into the fray, which had finally begun in earnest.